Imagine a widow walking her two little girls into a blizzard, chasing a dead man's promise buried in a silver mountain. If you want to see how far a mother will go against the richest silver company in Colorado, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the rest of this story. The train spat Nora Kane and her daughters into Silverton with a cough of steam and soot. The station was hardly more than a weathered platform nailed to the edge of the mountain. Beyond it, the town clung to the narrow valley like it had been thrown there and never quite settled. Buildings huddled close against one another, roofs thick with old snow, chimneys exhaling thin gray threads into thin, cold air. The altitude bit her lungs on the first breath. Rosie coughed, tiny shoulders shaking under her too thin coat. 8-year-old Annie tightened her grip on Nora's hand, eyes wide as she took in the streets, the horse, the men in stained shirts and heavy boots. "Is this it?" Annie whispered. "Is this where he was?" Nora swallowed, tasting cinders and fear. "Yes," she said. "This is where your father worked. Where he died," her mind added. She shifted the carpetbag higher on her shoulder and checked her pocket for the folded telegram she'd read so many times the paper felt like cloth now. The words were burned into her. "Mine on Anvil Creek is real. Claim in my name. Hold it for the girls. Trust me, Thomas. Trust me." She had trusted him when he left Boston. When he said there was money in Colorado, that a few good months in the mountains would wipe out their debts and bring him home with pockets full of silver and stories. Instead, she got a letter with a black border and a cramped official signature. "Regret to inform you, accident, 12 men lost." And then the telegram, sent before the cave-in, delayed in some office until there was no one to receive it but a widow already dressed in mourning. Now she was here, and the mountain air cut through her gloves. "Stay close," she murmured. "Don't let go of me. Understand?" Annie nodded, jaw set. Rosie just clung to Nora's skirt, face pressed against the wool. They stepped off the platform into a street churned to slush by wagon wheels and boots. The sun was already edging its way toward the rim of the valley, light slanting long and milky through the cold. Silverton smelled of wood smoke, coal, sour beer, and men who worked too hard and washed too little. A dog barked somewhere. A bell clanged faintly up the hill. Nora squared her shoulders. First shelter, she thought. Then food, then the mine. The boarding house on the corner had a painted sign swinging above its porch rooms and supper. "Respectable ladies and gentlemen." That sounded promising enough. She climbed the steps, her boots leaving watery prints on the planks, and knocked. A woman in a high-necked dress opened the door partway, warmth and the smell of stew curling around her like a taunt. "Yes," the woman said, eyes flicking over Nora, then down to the girls. "I need a room," Nora said, "for myself and my daughters, just for a little while. I can pay for a week." She reached for her reticule, fingers numb. The woman didn't even look at it. "No children," she said. "We don't have the space." Nora glanced over her shoulder at the hallway behind the woman. She could see at least 2 doors standing open, empty beds inside. "We'd be quiet," Nora said. "I was a teacher back east. My girls know how to behave. I can help with the washing, the cooking." The woman shook her head. "We're full," she said. "You should try it down by the livery. They'll have something suitable." The way she said suitable made it sound like filth. The door closed. Nora stared at the peeling paint a moment longer than was polite. Her pulse beat hard behind her eyes. "All right," she said softly. "Next one." They tried the hotel. It was grander, with tall front windows and polished brass handles. The man behind the desk took one look at Nora's black dress, the scuffed carpet bag, the girls hovering behind her, and smiled with his mouth while his eyes remained flat. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he said. "We're quite full. Railroad men coming through, important fellows. We're turning people away as it is." He tapped the bell on the counter with 2 idle fingers and gave her a sympathetic tilt of the head that never reached his eyes. "Perhaps if you spoke with the sheriff," he added. He might direct you to charitable accommodations. Charity. The word sat sour on her tongue. Outside. Annie kicked at a ridge of frozen mud. Why won't they let us stay? She asked. We have money. Because they don't want the trouble, Nora said. Her breath ghosted in front of her. Because the world is not always kind. Rosie coughed again, harsher this time. We'll find somewhere, Nora said quickly. We just have to keep asking. Vigilance tightened in her chest when she stepped through the door of the sheriff's office. The man behind the desk was big, with a belly pushing against his vest and a badge glinting on his chest. He had a ledger open, pen in hand. He didn't look up until Nora's shadow fell across his page. Help you, he asked. I'm Nora Kane, she said. My husband worked here, in the mines. Her throat tightened. He died in the cave-in last year. The sheriff's brows twitched. Lots of widows after that one, he said. You'll need to be more specific. Thomas Kane, she said. He had a claim on Anvil Creek. The Kane claim. I have papers. She touched the telegram in her pocket as if it could burn through the fabric and prove her right. He exhaled through his nose. Condolences, he said, the word worn from use. You're here alone with my girls. She laid a hand on Annie's head. We need a place to stay. Just until I can reach the claim and see what's left. Someone suggested you might know of something. His gaze slid to the children. They've got a place at Denver, he said. Orphan trains, churches back east, girls get schooling, meals. Better than trying to scratch a living up here. I can tell you that. I didn't ask about sending them away. Nora said, voice sharpening. He shrugged. Not many accommodations for women with young'uns, he said, especially not in winter. There's the Chinese Quarter, but I doubt you'll want that. Otherwise, he spread his hands. So that's it, Nora asked. My choices are a brothel, a flop house down by the livery, or shipping my daughters off to strangers. He met her eyes then, something like pity or annoyance creeping in. I don't make the rules. Mrs. Kane, he said. I just enforce them. He dropped his gaze back to the ledger. We're done here, Nora said. Outside, the wind cut harder. The clouds were stacking over the ridges to the west, dark and heavy. Annie's nose was pink. She rubbed it with the back of her hand. Are they going to send us away? She asked. Nora crouched so she could look her daughter in the eye. No, she said. No one is taking you from me. Do you understand? What if they make you? Annie whispered. Nora thought of the telegram, of Thomas's careful letters from the mountain, the way he'd always ended with one line, tell the girls I'm coming home. I told your father I would hold what he left in my hands. She said, that includes you. Annie nodded, swallowing hard. Rosie leaned into Nora's shoulder, small fingers digging into her sleeve. Nora stood. The sun was slipping lower, shadows stretching long between the buildings. The ridge of the mountain beyond town loomed, white and unforgiving. The dark slash of the timber line marking where trees gave up trying. Somewhere beyond that, Anvil Creek cut through stone. Somewhere up there was a cabin, a shaft, a claim written in her husband's name. It would be cold. It would be dangerous. But it would be theirs. Where are we going? Mama Rosie wheezed. Nora looked uphill, then down the street toward the cheap lodging the sheriff had not quite named. You heard him, Ugg, she said quietly. There's no place for us here. She shifted the carpet bag again, adjusting the strap over her shoulder. We're going to the mountain, she said. We're going to your father's mine. Annie followed her gaze, eyes widening. Now, she breathed. Before they think of more ways to be helpful. Nora said, she didn't have a guide. She didn't have proper gear. She had a pair of worn boots, a coat too thin for the altitude, 2 exhausted children, and whatever stubbornness grief had left behind in her spine. She turned toward the row of buildings that smelled of smoke and cheap liquor. If anyone would know the way to Anvil Creek, It would be the men spending their wages on whiskey. The saloon was already busy, even with the sun not yet down. Piano music bled out through the bat-wing doors, thin and frantic. Laughter followed, rough around the edges. Nora hesitated only a heartbeat before pushing the doors open and shepherding the girls inside. The heat hit her first, then the eyes. A dozen men turned to look at her, at the black of her dress, at the small faces peering from behind her skirts. A few chuckled. One whistled low. "This ain't a church." "Ma'am," someone said. "You lost, I need directions," Nora said, keeping her chin level. "To Anvil Creek," the Kane claim. "My husband ain't nothing up there but ghosts." A man at the bar called. "Ghosts and rock," and Bother added, "and maybe a few bones if the snows melted enough." Laughter rippled. Nora's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "Does anyone here know the way?" she asked. "I'll pay for it." "Lady, you'll die up there," the bartender said, wiping a glass. "You and those little ones. That's no place for alone," a voice slurred from the far corner. "She'll die up there alone." There was more laughter, but it broke off when the speaker shoved back his chair and stood. He was taller than the others, shoulders broad under a once fine coat gone shabby. His shirt was half unbuttoned, his jaw dark with stubble. A bottle hung from his fingers, the liquid inside low. His eyes, though bloodshot, were sharp. He walked toward Nora with a slow, unsteady grace that told her he'd had practice moving while drunk. "What claim did you say?" he asked. "Kane," Nora said. "Thomas Kane, on Anvil Creek." For a second, something flickered across his face, their recognition, pain, guilt. "You're his?" he asked. "I'm his wife," she said. "Was." He nodded once, as if confirming something he'd already suspected. "I can take you up," he said. The bartender snorted. "Ro, you can't even take yourself home half the time," he said. "You'll lead her into a ravine and forget why you're there." The man Ro didn't look away from Nora. "I know that ridge," he said. "Know the creek that runs like a knife through it. I know where your husband sank his shaft and where the mountain swallowed him." His words cut clean. Nora's heart kicked against her ribs. "You worked with him?" she asked. "I worked for the people who work everyone," he said. Consolidated Silver. The name sat heavy in the air. Even in Boston she'd heard it. In the newspapers, in the mouths of men at the bank. Consolidated Silver Company with its fingers in half the mines west of the Mississippi. Great for investors. Less great for the men underground. Ro tipped the bottle toward her. "I can take you to what's left," he said. "If you've got money." Nora slid her hand into her pocket and closed it around the small roll of bills she had left. Months of skimping, of selling what furniture they could, of knocking on doors for a teacher's salary that vanished into debts. "I can pay you $5 now," she said. "5 more when we get there." The men at the bar whistled. $5, one said. "For walking a lady into an early grave, that's easy money." Ro's jaw tightened. "I want the money," he said, "and a bottle to go." The bartender shrugged. "Your funeral," he said, reaching under the counter. Nora shifted the girls behind her, away from the reach of any sloppy hands. Her heart was hammering, but she forced herself to study the man in front of her. His clothes were worn but had been good once. His boots were solid. The way he stood said he knew how to carry his weight over uneven ground. He looked like a man who had been broken and then kept walking out of sheer stubbornness. He looked tired. "My name is Nora Kane," she said. "These are my daughters, Annie and Rosie. If you abandon us on that mountain, I will haunt you myself." His mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "Caleb Rowe," he said, "and if you die up there, Mrs. Kane, it won't be because I didn't tell you not to go." Outside, the room exhaled a mixture of amusement and morbid anticipation. Inside, Nora counted out 5 crumpled bills into his free hand. "Finish that," she said, nodding at the bottle, "and then we leave." He stared at the money, then at her. "You don't have to do this," he said. "You could take some charity. Send the girls on a train." "No," Nora said, sharper than she intended. "We are not parcels to be shipped. We are going to my husband's claim." He watched her a long moment. Then he tossed back the last of the whiskey in the bottle, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and dropped the empty glass on the bar. "Get your coat tighter," he said. "It's a long way up before it gets dark." Hotel. The path out of Silverton rose quickly, a thin scar of a trail cutting up the valley wall. The houses fell away behind them, then the last outbuildings, then even the sound of the town, the piano, the voices, the creak of wagons dulled to a faint memory. Wind took its place, knifing up the draw, carrying the smell of snow and stone. Caleb walked ahead, boots finding purchase where the packed earth turned to rock and ice. He didn't look back often, but when he did, his eyes swept over Nora and the girls, cataloging. "Keep Rosie on your left," he called once when the trail narrowed, dropping off into white emptiness. "If she slips, at least she'll fall into you, not the ravine." Nora adjusted, muscles aching with the effort of keeping her balance and her grip on her daughters. Her breath burned. Every inhale felt like dragging ice shards into her chest. "How much farther?" Annie asked, voice thin. "Halfway," Caleb said. Nora didn't know if he was lying to comfort or to harden. It didn't matter. There was no going back. The sun slid lower. Shadows pooled in the hollows between ridges. Her fingers had gone numb inside her gloves. "We should stop," Caleb said at last, pausing near a clump of dark trees huddled together against the slope. "Girls need to rest." Nora wanted to say they couldn't afford to, that every minute they spent sitting meant glare ice and blind stumbling in the dark. But Rosie was limping now, little boots dragging. "All right," she said. Caleb shrugged off his pack and disappeared into the trees. Nora sank onto a rock, pulling the girls close, using her body as a windbreak. Annie's teeth chattered. "Are we close to heaven?" she asked, trying to sound flippant and failing. "Not if I can help it," Nora said, forcing a smile. Caleb returned with an armful of broken branches and something dry and brittle that might once have been a bush. "Don't get too comfortable," he said, crouching. "We're not building a hotel. Just enough fire to put some warmth in their bones." He worked fast, hands sure even with the tremor of withdrawal already beginning in his fingers. In minutes, smoke curled up, then a tiny flame. He fed it patiently until it grew big enough to hug with his hands. Rosie edged closer, eyes closing as the heat touched her skin. Caleb glanced at Nora. "You shouldn't have brought them," he said quietly. "You know that." She stared at the flames. "I didn't have a choice," she said. "There's always a choice," he said. "Yes." She met his gaze. "And every one of mine led here." He looked away first. They didn't linger. The fire ate its fuel quickly, and night was waiting. By the time they reached the shelf where the cabin sat, Nora's legs felt hollow. The world had narrowed to the crunch of her boots, the weight of Rosie against her hip, the sound of Annie's breath behind her. "Here, Ed," Caleb said at last, stopping. The cabin appeared out of the dust like a ghost low and squat, its roof humped under snow, smoke hole dark. Beyond it, the black rectangle of a mine adit was cut into the hillside, framed in old timbers, like a mouth frozen in mid-cry. Nora stopped. Her heart beat painfully. "This is it," she whispered. "This is it," Caleb said. Kane's claim on Anvil Creek. The creek itself was a voice in the dark, a distant rush under ice somewhere down the slope. The air smelled of old wood, damp stone, and the faint tang of something metallic when the wind shifted. Caleb trudged to the cabin door and shouldered it open. It protested but gave way. Inside, the air was stale and cold. Dust motes hung in the last light that leaked through gaps in the shutters. A table, 2 chairs, A bunk against the wall with an old, flattened mattress. A stove with a pipe that disappeared into the ceiling, rusted but intact. He stepped aside. "Welcome home," he said dryly. Nora crossed the threshold as if into a church. She set Rosie down gently on the bunk, then brushed a hand over the rough wood of the table. There were marks in it, nicks and cuts where someone had chopped vegetables, sharpened a knife, slammed a cup down too hard. Her throat closed. She could see Thomas here, laughing, cursing, writing in that cramped handwriting of his by lamplight, tongue between his teeth. "He was here," she whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said. "He was." Something in his voice made her look at him, but his face was turned away, busy with the stove. He moved efficiently, shucking off his coat, checking the firebox, stacking wood from a small pile in the corner. In minutes, he had a flame coaxed from old bark and splinters. It smoked at first, then drew, heat beginning to seep into the small space. "We'll need more wood tomorrow," he said, "and water. There's a spring a ways off." Nora nodded, not sure she heard him right. Her ears were full of blood. "Annie," she managed, "take off your sister's boots. Get their stockings by the fire." Annie moved, hands clumsy from cold but determined. Caleb straightened. "I'll sleep in the chair," he said. "You and the girls take the bunk. In the morning, I'll show you the shaft properly. Then I'll be on my way." Nora looked at him. "On your way where?" she asked. "Anywhere that isn't here," he said, gaze skimming the low ceiling. "I told you, Mrs. Kane, I don't save people. I just show them where they're going. You brought us here," she said. "That counts for something." He gave a small, humorless huff. "Don't make me into something I'm not," he said. He settled into the chair, boots stretched toward the stove, hat tipped low as if he meant to drift off. But Nora could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his fingers kept flexing. She found a tin cup on a shelf, wiped it on her skirt, and filled it with melting snow from a pan Caleb had set near the heat. Rosie drank in tiny sips. Annie held her hands out to the fire, lips moving silently, maybe counting, maybe praying. When the girls were finally under the thin blanket on the bunk, cheeks flushing back from gray to pink, Nora sat at the table. The light from the stove flickered across the scarred wood. Her hands shook as she drew the telegram from her pocket and unfolded it yet again. "Mine on Anvil Creek is real. Claim in my name. Hold it for the girls. Trust me." She traced his name at the bottom. Thomas Kane. The ink was smudged where his hand had dragged. "Trust you," she whispered. "I'm here, Thomas. I did what you asked." Now what? The only answer was the creak of cooling wood and the distant mutter of the creek under its lid of ice. Her eyes burned. She bowed her head over the paper. Knuckles white. Behind her, Caleb Rose sat in the shadow between the stove's glow and the door, hat pushed forward to hide his face. His own eyes were open, fixed on the floorboards. He could hear her breath hitch, hear the faint fabric rasp as she wiped at her cheeks. He looked at the shape of the girls in the bunk. Two small forms curled together, trust embodied. He closed his eyes. He remembered another night in this valley. The ground had shuddered like a living thing. There had been a sound deep and terrible, as if the mountain itself were being strangled. Then the collapse, the roar, the dust, men screaming in the black. 12 dead, dozens hurt. A company man with a clean collar and a pen in his hand telling Caleb what to sign. Unforeseen accident. No negligence. He had signed. He'd taken the bonus they pushed at him afterward and used it to pay for his little brother's coffin. Now he was back on the same slope, breathing the same thin air. Sitting by a stove he'd seen before, listening to the widow of one of those men read a dead man's promise. He flexed his fingers until the scars on his knuckles ached. He could walk away in the morning, just like he said. Take his $5 and whatever was left of the bottle and chase numbness down a trail heading anywhere but here. Or he could stay. 1 month, she'd said. 1 month to help her find what her husband had seen in the rock. He didn't owe her that. He didn't owe anyone anything. He'd told himself for a year. But when he'd heard her name in the saloon, when he'd heard Kane in Anvil Creek, something old and heavy had shifted in his chest. "I'll stay," he murmured, so quietly even he barely heard it. The stove popped. On the bunk, one of the girls sighed in her sleep. Caleb leaned his head back against the wall and let his eyes close. He dreamed of tunnels, of timbers groaning, of a clipboard in his hand and a signature bleeding across the bottom, tying him to 12 bodies under rock. And when the first gray light of morning slid through the cracks in the shutters, he woke with the taste of dust in his mouth and the weight of a decision on his shoulders. He was the man who had signed off on Anvil Creek. Now he was the man who had led Thomas Kane's widow and children back to it. For the first time in a long time, Caleb Rowe allowed himself to think that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't done paying for what he'd done. The second morning on Anvil Creek began with the sound of the stove ticking and a thin edge of pale light under the door. Nora woke with both girls pressed against her. Small bodies curved into her, like they were trying to crawl back inside her ribs. For a moment she lay still, listening. The wind still moved outside, but gentler. The cabin creaked as if it were stretching after a long sleep. Somewhere snow slid off the roof with a muffled thump. Rosie's forehead under Nora's fingertips was warmer than it had been, but not hot. Annie's breath puffed slow and steady against her arm. For the first time in days, Nora's lungs filled all the way without snagging on panic. She eased herself out from under the blanket, careful not to jostle them, and set her bare feet on the cold floorboards. Caleb was already up. He stood by the stove in his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, coaxing more fire from the embers. The orange light licked across the planes of his face, throwing his eyes into shadow. "You sleep?" he asked without looking over. "Some," Nora said. He nodded as if that were an answer worth marking. "There's coffee," he said. "Weak as a kitten, but hot." He poured some into a dented tin cup and set it on the table. Nora wrapped her hands around it, feeling the heat seep into her fingers. The smell alone had almost made her weep. "You were going to leave this morning," she said. "That was before I saw how you swing an axe," he said. "I'd feel guilty letting the trees up here suffer that." A corner of her mouth twitched despite herself. "I can manage," she said. "I know you can." He said, "That's not the point." He poked at the fire again. "I'll stay," he said, still watching the flames. "A month. I'll help you figure out whether there's anything here worth freezing for." She blinked. "You don't owe us that," she said. "Maybe I do," he replied, too soft for her to catch all the weight inside it. She frowned. "What did you say? I said there's no use walking you up the mountain just to throw you back down it." He lied lazily. "Besides, if there's silver in that shaft, I get a cut. A man has to think of his future." "It sounded like you'd stopped," she said. "Stopped what?" "Thinking of your future." He shrugged to one shoulder. "Mountains have a way of reminding you you're still alive," he said, "even when you don't want the reminder." He straightened, dusting his hands on his trousers. "We'll need wood," he said. "Water. Then I'll show you the mine." China. By mid-morning, Nora's arms felt like they belonged to someone else. She had chopped wood before, back in Boston. A neat little pile beside a neat little stove in a cramped apartment. Kindling, mostly. Enough to boil water for tea. This was different. This was trees. Caleb showed her how to stand, how to set her feet, how to lift the axe so its weight worked for her, not against her. "Don't swing like you're swatting flies," he said, leaning against a stump. "Swing like you mean it." She meant it. Every stroke was a word she couldn't say. For the men in Silverton who'd turned her away, for the sheriff's lazy suggestion about orphan trains, for every polite, pitying glance in Boston, for Thomas, and the way he'd smiled when he told her about the West, as if he couldn't see how much it scared her, The wood split. The pile grew. When she finally let the axe fall still, breath ragged, sweat cooling under her shawl despite the air, Caleb nodded. Not bad, he said. For someone whose hands used to hold chalk. You don't know what my hands used to hold, she said. He looked at them at the small scars, the roughness that had come from scrubbing floors, mending, carrying. I can guess, he said. They carried water next. The spring was a short walk away, tucked in a hollow where the ground dipped and the snow thinned. The water was so clear it made her throat clench just looking at it. Never drink straight from a creek near a mine, Caleb said. Too much in the rock that doesn't belong in your blood. This spring's clean. How do you know? She asked. I've been here before, he said. That again. She wanted to press, to ask what he'd been doing up here, what he'd been paid, what he'd been told not to see. Instead, she watched him fill the buckets, the muscles in his forearms shifting under skin, the way his breath came in small white bursts in the cold. Annie can fetch with me once she's rested, she said. If we're staying, they'll have to learn too. They're children, he said. They're my children, she replied. And this mountain doesn't care who is which. He didn't argue with that. The mine was a mouth in the hillside. Up close, it looked less like a wound and more like a threat, black and square, framed in old timbers darkened by time and damp. Icicles hung like teeth along the top. The air that breathed out of it was colder than the air around them, tasting of stone and something metallic and old. First rule, Casey, Caleb said, standing at the threshold. You don't go in here alone, ever. You don't take the girls in at all. If I'm dead and gone and you still want to chase what's in there, you find another man who knows what he's doing, or you walk away. Nora hugged her shawl around her shoulders. I thought the first rule was, don't go at all, she said. That too, he said, but you're here, so we're already breaking rules. He lit a lantern, shielding the tiny flame with his hand until it caught the wick. The yellow light pushed back the dark just enough to make it look deeper. You can come a little way, he said, just to see. Then you go back. How generous, she murmured. He didn't respond. Inside, the ground sloped gently downward. The walls were close enough that if she stretched out her arms, she could touch them on both sides. The timbers overhead creaked softly. Old wood remembering what it was like to be a tree. Her skin crawled. This doesn't feel safe, she said quietly. It isn't, he replied. No, mine is. Some are just less unsafe than others. The lantern light skimmed across the walls. At first, all she saw was gray stone streaked with soot and sweat. Then she noticed the faint lines, the veins of something that caught the light differently. Silver, or at least its promise. Caleb lifted the lantern higher. See that, he said. That's why he stayed. She reached out and ran her fingers along the streak, feeling the subtle change under her skin. It looks like nothing, she said. Everything looks like nothing until you know what to do with it, he said. Or's no different than men that way. He moved deeper. Feet, sure, like he knew each board by name. How far did they drive this, she asked. Far enough to tempt fate, he said. Not far enough to be satisfied. There was a branching ahead, one tunnel veering off to the right, another dropping lower, where the air felt heavier. Caleb stopped at the intersection. We don't go there, he said, nodding toward the right-hand shaft. Why, she asked. Because that's where the mountain came down last time, he said. The rock remembers. It doesn't like being poked in old bruises. She nodded, throat tight. How many men were in here, she asked. 12 who didn't walk back out, he said. More who did, and Thomas, her voice was barely above a whisper. He hesitated. I wasn't inside when it went, he said. I was standing above, reading a report. By the time I got down here, it was all dust and shouting. Did you see him? She pressed. No, he said. Just the tail end of his name on a list. The lantern flickered. She stepped back. I've seen enough for now, she said. Good, he replied. Go wait at the mouth. I want to look at the face. The place they were cutting, he said, where the ore shows best. She didn't like the idea of leaving him in there, but she liked less the idea of being deeper underground than she already was. She turned and walked back toward the square of gray light. At the entrance, she stepped out and gulped in the cold air like it was water. Behind her, the mountain hummed softly, the sound of its own slow shifting. She stared out at the valley, at the distant line of trees, the glint of the creek under its thin lid of ice. Down there was a town that had no room for her. Up here was a mine that had already taken her husband. Between those two facts was a narrow strip of possibility. She stood on it like a tightrope. After a while, Caleb emerged, shoulders dusted with rock. Lantern dimmer. Well, she asked. He wiped on his sleeve across his forehead. He wasn't lying, Caleb said. Your husband. The vein is good. Rich. Whoever surveyed for the company either didn't look closely or chose to be blind. So it's worth something, she said. It's worth a hell of a lot, he said quietly. Enough to make men greedy. Enough to make them careless. Her heart thudded. The company, she said. Consolidated. They knew about this? They know about everything, he said. Or they think they do. His gaze flicked back at the dark mouth of the mine. They'll know soon enough you're here, he added. Word of new arrivals climbs faster than the trail. She thought of the sheriff's flat gaze, of the hotel clerk's calculated smile. Good, she said. He looked at her, startled. Good, he echoed. If they want it, she said, it means I'm standing in the right place. She found the notebook by accident. It was evening. The girls were half dozing by the stove. Annie's head tipped back against the wall. Rosie curled like a cat in her lap. Caleb had gone outside to check the sky, something he did each night as if consulting an old friend. Nora was sweeping. It was a pointless task. In some ways, the cabin was more draft than wall, and the wind brought dust in as quickly as she chased it out, but the motion calmed her. It gave her hands something to do other than ring. The broom snagged on a warped board near the table leg. She frowned and nudged at it with the bristles. It lifted slightly. Curiosity pricked. She set the broom aside and crouched, working her fingers under the edge of the board. It came up with a protesting creak, revealing a small, dark space beneath. Her heart stuttered. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a bundle. Her hands shook as she lifted it out and peeled the cloth away. A notebook. The cover was scuffed, the edges worn, but she recognized the cramped, determined handwriting on the first page even before she fully opened it. Thomas. The words jumped at her. Day 3, Anvil Creek. Ore looks better than surveys said. Either fools or liars. Day 10, Consolidated sent Sutton. Smiles too white. Wants to discuss options for the claim. Says the company always takes care of men who cooperate. Don't trust him. Don't trust his handshake. Further down, day 27. They want the water rights too. Told him no. He didn't like hearing it. Said he hopes nothing unfortunate happens in such an unstable environment. Her breath went thin. She flipped to the last entries, heart racing. If something happens to me, Nora, and you find this, the ink blotted, as if his hand had hesitated, don't let them take it easy. If they want this mine, make them bleed money for it. And if you can't, if it's too much, then let it go and take the girls east. Don't let my pride bury you. Her vision blurred. She wiped at her eyes with the back of her wrist. Too late. Thomas, she thought, I'm already buried. Just not in the place you intended. Behind her, the door opened with a gust of colder air. Caleb stepped in, stomping snow from his boots. Storm brewing, he said. Sky's got that look. He stopped when he saw the open floorboard, the notebook in her hands. Where did you get that, he asked. Where he hid it, she said, voice raw, under his own feet. She turned the notebook so he could see the page. "Did you know he'd written this?" she asked. "That Sutton came up here before, that he tried to buy Thomas out." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I knew Sutton was sniffing around," he said. "He doesn't like anything he doesn't own." "And the accident?" she asked. The word felt like a stone in her mouth. Was it just that, or did something unfortunate happen the way he hoped? Caleb's gaze slid to the stove. "I wasn't in the drift when it went," he said. "I told you that." "That's not an answer," she said. He looked at her. For a moment, something in his face cracked. A flicker of old fear, old guilt, old rage. "I don't know what he ordered," he said. "I know the ground was bad. I know we were pushing the timbers harder than we should have to meet quotas someone in an office wrote without ever seeing the rock. I know I signed papers saying it was safe enough because the numbers in front of me lied as pretty as Sutton's smile." Her fingers dug into the notebook. "You signed," she repeated. "You said it was safe." "I said it was within margins," he said, voice flattening. "Margins someone else adjusted after." "We'll get to that. We'll get to that," she echoed bitterly. "How convenient." He flinched. She closed the notebook carefully, as if it were made of glass, and set it on the table. "My husband believed this place would save us," she said. "He believed enough to die here." And there was a man standing above him with a pen in his hand saying it was all right to keep digging. "Nora, you knew Sutton before he came up this hill," she cut in. "If he shows his face here again, it won't be a surprise to you. It will be a continuation." He swallowed. "You are not the only man responsible," she said. "But you are not innocent either." He nodded once, jaw clenched. "I know," he said. Silence pressed in, thick as snow. The stove popped. Rosie turned over in her sleep, sighing. Nora looked down at her daughter's face, small and soft, cheeks smudged. This mine had already taken one parent from them. It was still hungry. The thought rose in her like cold water. They killed him because he said no. Her stomach lurched. She picked up the notebook again, holding it to her chest. "If Sutton comes back," she said softly, "I want to see his eyes when I tell him I know." Caleb watched her. "You think that's wise?" he asked. "I don't know," she said, "but I know it's mine." He came 3 days later. The storm Caleb had smelled on the air rolled through that night, dumping another foot of wet snow on the slopes. The wind howled around the cabin, testing the seams, looking for ways in. They passed the hours with tasks and silence. Annie helped mend a shirt with stitches that were big and clumsy but earnest. Rosie slept more than she was awake, worn out by the altitude and the cold, a faint wheeze in her chest that made Nora's fingers drum restlessly against her own arm whenever she sat too long. "How did he breathe up here?" she muttered once, thinking of Thomas. "How did he breathe with this weight on his chest, same way we do?" Caleb said quietly, one thin breath at a time. When the wind finally eased and the cloud lifted, the world outside was white and blinding. Nora had just set a pan of biscuits near the stove when the sound of hoofbeats filtered through the stillness. Not one horse. Several. Her heart jumped. Caleb looked up from where he was whittling a new handle for the axe. "Stay here, mate," he said. He shrugged into his coat, grabbed the rifle from its hooks near the door, and stepped outside. Nora moved to the window, careful to keep low. She saw them as shadows first, then as men on horseback, dark shapes cutting across the snow. There were 3 of them. The one in front sat his horse like the saddle had been built around him. His coat was fine wool, its dark cloth a shock against the white. His hat was angled just so. Even at a distance, Nora could see the neatness in him, the straight line of his posture, the careful restraint of his reins. The others behind him wore company coats, the kind she'd seen on foremen in old photographs. Their hands rested near holsters. Caleb walked out to meet them, the rifle held easy, not quite pointed. The man in front smiled. Nasty weather, he called. His voice reached the cabin as a smooth, practiced sound. Ought to have turned a lady like Mrs. Kane right around. Nora stiffened. He knew her name. Caleb didn't bother to smile back. Sutton, he said. The man inclined his head. Row, he replied. I'm surprised to see you vertical. Likewise, Caleb said. They regarded each other for a moment. Two pieces of a past neither had mentioned to Nora until now. Asher Sutton swung down from his saddle with a care that suggested he did not often walk on anything as forgiving as dirt. His boots sank into the snow and he frowned as if offended. He brushed a fleck of white from his sleeve and looked toward the cabin. May I? He asked Caleb, nodding toward the door. You're already trespassing, Caleb said. Might as well be rooted all the way. Sutton's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. He stepped carefully up to the door and knocked, as if this were a parlor and not a shack hanging off the side of a mountain. Nora opened it before he could knock again. Mrs. Kane, he said smoothly. What a pleasure to finally make your acquaintance. Asher Sutton, Consolidated Silver. He took off his hat with a gentle flourish. He was not what she'd expected. He was younger, late 30s, perhaps, with hair only just beginning to gray at the temples. His coat and gloves were of a quality that had never brushed against a mine wall. His eyes were a pale, sharp blue that missed nothing. Mr. Sutton, she said, I've read your name. Ah. He glanced past her at the notebook lying on the table. I see Thomas left more than rock behind. She stepped subtly, blocking his view. You've come a long way up, she said. For a social call. He smiled. For business, Mrs. Kane, he said. And perhaps to save you some trouble. He looked over his shoulder at the men waiting by their horses, then back at her. May I come in, he repeated. Nora hesitated, then stepped aside. He entered as if he were stepping into a hotel lobby, gaze flicking over stove, bunk, girls. Annie, perched on the edge of the bed with her mending forgotten in her lap, stared back at him with open dislike. Rosie pressed herself into the wall. What lovely children, Sutton said, as if noticing nice drapes. You must be very proud. I am, Nora said. Caleb stayed by the door, rifle now rested against his shoulder, eyes never quite leaving Sutton's hands. Sutton removed his gloves and laid them neatly on the corner of the table. His fingers were smooth, the nails clean. You've come to talk about the mine, Nora said. Say it plain. He chuckled. I do appreciate a direct woman, he said. Yes, I'm here because Consolidated holds certain interests in this valley. We have invested heavily in infrastructure, transport, safety. Caleb made a small noise at that last word that wasn't quite a laugh. Sutton ignored it. We understand your husband had a claim upriver, he continued. We also understand he tragically passed before the full value could be realized. Tragically, Nora repeated. That's one word for it. Sutton tilted his head, studying her. I'm sure he was a good man, he said. Ambitious. But ambition without backing can be hazardous. Up here, the mountain does not care for paperwork. It cares only for weight and pressure and time. He spread his hands. I'm prepared to offer you a solution that honors his work and protects you and your daughters from unnecessary hardship. He said, Consolidated would like to purchase the Kane claim for a fair sum, enough for you to return to Boston or wherever you please and live comfortably. Comfortably, Nora said. On top of what, $10,000, he said. Annie's mouth fell open. Nora kept her expression still. That's generous, she said. More generous than some on my board would like. He replied with a half smile. But I find generosity, deployed wisely, can prevent what did Thomas call them unfortunate events. Her fingers tightened on the back of the chair. You were here, she said, before the cave-in. You offered to buy him out. He shrugged. as if the memory were of a business dinner gone slightly off-key. "We had conversations," he said. "Men in our industry have them all the time." And when he said no, she asked. Sutton's eyes cooled. "Accidents happen," he said. "Underground. You know that? Do they get wished for in advance?" Nora asked. In someone's tidy notebook, his gaze flicked to the ledger on the table again, then back. "He was a stubborn man," Sutton said. "You have that in common. But stubbornness and children are a dangerous mix." He took a step closer, lowering his voice. "Mrs. Kane," he said, "you are alone here, on a mountain that kills experienced men without blinking. Winter is not done with this place. The town is not particularly welcoming. If something happened to you up here, if you froze or took a fall, what would become of Annie and Rosie?" Rosie made a small sound at the sound of her name. Annie's hand found her sister's without looking. "We'll manage," Nora said. "Will you?" he asked softly. "The sheriff has mentioned the orphan trains. The church ladies do write such touching letters when they send little ones east. They always say it's for the children's own good." Fire flared in Nora's chest. "You think to scare me with the things I've already thought about and rejected," she said. "You're late to that game. Mr. Sutton." He smiled again, but there was a hint of admiration in it. "I think to remind you that the world is not sentimental," he said. "It will not bend just because you wish it. $10,000 gives you leverage. Options. A life somewhere that isn't trying to throw you off a cliff." He glanced at Caleb. "And it's not as if you're without company," he added. "I'm sure Mr. Rowe would be more than happy to drink away his share in a warmer climate." Caleb's jaw tightened. "This isn't about me," he said. "Everything up here is about you," Sutton said lightly. "You signed the papers. You know the seams. You know where the bodies are, figuratively and literally." He turned back to Nora. "Take the money," he said. "Let the men who understand these things handle the risk. Go back to reading books to your girls by a proper fire, instead of shivering over a pile of scrap wood." Nora studied him. Behind the practiced charm, the polished concern, she saw calculation. She saw a man who had already weighed her life against columns of numbers and found it negligible. Thomas's words in the notebook pressed against her ribs like a fist. Don't trust him. Don't trust his handshake. She straightened. "No," she said. Sutton blinked. "I beg your pardon?" he asked. "No," she repeated. "I won't sell. Not to you. Not now." His smile thinned. "This is not Boston. Mrs. Kane, Muhammad," he said. "You can't simply say no and expect the world to respect it." "I noticed," she said. "I'm saying it anyway." He looked at Caleb. "You're advising her in this?" he asked. "After everything I told her what the rock says." Caleb replied, "She's making her own decision." Sutton's gaze hardened. "Well," he said, "let it not be said I didn't try to prevent tragedy when I had the chance." He picked up his gloves, pulling them on with sharp, precise movements. "There will be a hearing," he said, "in town, about boundaries and the status of your claim. Now that Thomas is deceased, the county recorder will send formal notice. I suggest you attend, for the girl's sake, if not your own." He tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Kane, Mr. Rowe, girls." He stepped back out into the cold. From the window, Nora watched him swing up into the saddle with practiced ease. He said something to the men beside him that made them laugh. Then they turned and rode away, dark shapes dwindling against the white. Inside, the cabin seemed smaller. Annie let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "I don't like him," she said. "Good," Nora said. "You have sense, then." Caleb leaned the rifle back in its corner. "He'll be back," he said, "in one form or another." "I know," Nora said. "Next time, I'll be ready." Miguel Santos found Caleb in town a week later. The trip down the mountain was supposed to be a simple resupply run. They needed flour, salt, kerosene. The girls were going through socks faster than Nora could darn them. Caleb had argued she should come down alone, leave him with the girls. But she'd refused. "You know that town," she'd said. "They know you. I'll get more doors slammed in my face if I go alone." In the end, they compromised. He went down first. She would follow another day, with Annie, leaving Rosie at the cabin for a few hours. That was the plan. He walked into the general store with his hat low and his shoulders squared, hoping to make his purchases and be back on the trail before anyone decided they wanted to remember his name. He almost succeeded. "Row," a voice said from behind him as he set a sack of flour on the counter. "Never thought I'd see you buying anything but whiskey." Caleb's back went tight. He turned. Miguel Santos stood near the door, a coil of rope over one shoulder, snow on his boots. His hair was shorter than Caleb remembered, streaked with more gray, but his eyes were the same dark, deep, and filled with something heavy. "Miguel," Caleb said. For a heartbeat, they just stared at each other. The general store owner, catching the air, suddenly found a reason to be very busy in the back. "You got nerve," Miguel said finally. "Coming back here, coming back up there." Caleb's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. "I go where I go," he said. Miguel's lip curled. "You mean where they let you," he said. "Where they pay you." He stepped closer, until the air between them was tight. "You remember my brother?" he asked softly. "Or do they all blur together now? 12 men under rock. 12 funerals you didn't attend." "I remember," Caleb said. Miguel's hand moved fast. For a second, Caleb thought he was reaching for a knife. Instead, he jabbed a finger into Caleb's chest. "You signed," Miguel hissed. "You signed that paper. Said the drift was safe. Said they could keep pushing. My brother trusted that. He trusted your name on a line more than he trusted his own ears in the rock." "I know," Caleb said. "Do you?" Miguel demanded. "Because from where I stand, you look very much alive. And he's still under there somewhere, feeding worms." Caleb's jaw clenched. "There were changes," he said. "After I signed, numbers altered, warnings removed. I didn't see it until it was too late." "How convenient." Miguel spat, echoing Nora without knowing it. "You always see it too late." He shoved away, breathing hard. "You working for Consolidated again?" he asked. "That why you're buying supplies? Sutton send you up to finish the job, no?" Caleb said, "I'm not working for him." "Then what?" Miguel demanded. Caleb hesitated. He could lie, say he was passing through, say he was working some other claim. But the truth felt heavy in his mouth, and he was tired of swallowing it. "I'm working for the widow," he said. Miguel blinked. "What widow?" he asked. "Kane," Caleb said. "Thomas's wife. She came up with the girls." Miguel's eyes widened. "Up there," he said. "With you," Caleb nodded. Miguel let out a low curse in Spanish, hands scrubbing over his face. "She's crazy," he said. "She's desperate and," Caleb replied, "like most people in this town." Miguel paced a short, agitated line. "Thomas helped me once," he said abruptly. "When Consolidated wanted to fire me for speaking up, he went to bat for me with the foreman. Cost him shifts. He said a man who hears the mountains should not be wasted." Caleb felt the words land. "He wrote about you," Caleb said. Miguel looked up sharply. "In his notebook?" Caleb added. "He hid it in the cabin. He said you were a good miner, that you deserved better than men like Sutton." Silence stretched. "What does she want?" Miguel asked finally. "To keep what's hers," Caleb said. "To hold the claim for her daughters." Miguel snorted. "Against Sutton," he said. "Against Consolidated little schoolteacher from Boston. She's stronger than she looks," Caleb said quietly. Miguel studied him. And you, he asked, what do you want? Ro, to feel like a good man for once, to crawl under God's skirt and say, I tried. Caleb's throat worked. I want to stop lying by omission, he said, to myself, to the dead, to their families. Starting with her. Miguel's gaze sharpened. You haven't told her, he said, about the signature. Not yet, Caleb admitted. Miguel laughed once. Harsh. Coward, he said. You walk around with ghosts on your shoulders and still you're afraid of one woman's eyes. You're not wrong, Caleb said. Miguel picked up his rope again. You tell her, man, he said, or I will. I don't know her, but I know what it's like to live with questions where the truth should be. If she stays up there, she deserves to know exactly what kind of men she's fighting. He moved toward the door, then paused. And if you hurt her, he said, not turning. I know. Caleb said, you'll add my bones to the pile. Miguel didn't deny it. He stepped out into the snow, letting the door swing shut behind him. Caleb stood there a long moment, breathing in the dust and kerosene and fear. Then he paid for the flour and the salt and the kerosene, hefted the sacks onto his shoulder, and headed back up the trail. The mountain waited. So did the truth. Rosie's illness began as a cough. At first, Nora thought it was just the altitude, the dry cold. All of them had been coughing off and on since they arrived, hacking up the city air and replacing it with thinner, harsher stuff. But Rosie's cough didn't ease. By the end of the week, there was a rattle in it. By the next, fever. Nora sat by the bunk, watching sweat bead on her daughter's lip, feeling the heat radiate off her small body. Annie hovered near the stove, fetching water, wringing cloths, her young face pinched with worry. Drink, darling, Nora murmured, lifting the cup to Rosie's cracked lips. Rosie turned her head weakly. It hurts, she whispered. I know, Nora said. Just a little. Please. Rosie obeyed, throat working. Nora set the cup a swishbell. Hands trembling, but Caleb stood into the doorway, shoulders filling the frame. He looked older in that moment. Not from years, but from the weight of watching someone small suffer. I've seen this before, he said quietly. Most kids shake it if they're strong. Some don't. Very helpful. Nora snapped, then winced at her own sharpness. Sorry, I can't lose her. Not after her voice broke. Caleb stepped into the room. You might need a doctor, he said, or someone who knows more herbs than I do. There's a woman in town, runs a boarding house near the Chinese Quarter. Mrs. Chen, she's seen more sickness than most physicians. Could be she'd know what to do. Nora stared at him. We can't take her down like this, she said. She'll die on the trail. The trail's not the only problem, he said. Sutton's already sniffing around. If he hears you've left the cabin empty, he'll make trouble with the claim. Say you abandoned it, so we stay and she does. Nora said, or we go and we lose everything. Not necessarily, he said. She looked at him, anger and fear twisting inside her. You have something better than necessarily, she asked. He hesitated. I went down to town, he said. Ran into Miguel Santos. Miguel, she repeated, the miner from Thomas's notes. He nodded. He hates me. With cause, Caleb said, but he doesn't hate Thomas. Or you. He might be persuaded to watch the place if you had to go down with the girls. And what about Sutton, she asked. And the hearing you say is coming. How do I fight that from a sickbed in town? You don't, he said. Not there. Then where she demanded? Denver, he said. The word felt like another country. Denver, she repeated. He nodded. Sutton owns half this town, he said, or thinks he does. The judge eats at his table. The recorder owes him money. You try to fight him here, you'll be shouting into a well. He took a breath. But if the right people in Denver see Thomas's notebook, he went on, if a reporter prints words like corruption and 12 dead miners next to Consolidated's name, If a politician looking for a cause hears there might be votes in standing up to the big bad Silvermen, that's pressure Sutton can't buy off so easy. You've thought about this, she said. Too long, he replied. He looked at Rosie, then back at Nora. You can't be in two places at once, he said. You can't sit by your daughter's bed and ride to the Capitol. But I can ride, she bristled. And leave me here alone, she asked. With a sick child, a half-broken cabin, and a company man ready to push us off the mountain, I won't leave you alone, he said. Miguel can be brought into this. Mrs. Chen can help with Rosie. I can take the notebook, the survey maps, the company memos I still have copies of. I can put them on a desk in front of someone who has to at least pretend to care. Her mind skittered around the idea, looking for the edges. You expect me to trust you with the last thing Thomas left me, she asked. To ride off with his words in your pocket and come back. When if ever no, he said. I expect you not to trust me, but I'm asking you to weigh that against the certainty of what happens if you don't send someone. She stared at him. His eyes were bloodshot from too many late nights and not enough drink. There were lines at the corners that hadn't been there when she first saw him in the saloon. He looked raw, like someone who'd been sanded down to what he really was. What aren't you telling me, she asked. He flinched as if she'd struck him. Nora, you keep pausing, she said. You keep stopping just short of the thing that matters. You told me you signed papers, that numbers were changed, that you weren't in the drift when it went. What else? He ran a hand over his face. The muscles in his jaw bunched. I took money, he said finally. Before the cave-in, the words hung between them, ugly and heavy. What money, she asked, though she already knew. Bonus, he said. They called it hazard pay. I'd been arguing for more supports in the drift. The foreman said the numbers didn't justify it. Sutton came in, all easy charm, and said if I signed off on the current plan, there'd be consideration. Enough to bring my brother out from the eastern fields, get him a real job. Real pay. He laughed once, short and bitter. I told myself I was only agreeing with what the book already said. He said that the rock would hold a little longer, that the men knew the risks, that it wasn't my name that put them there, just my pen that let them stay. Nora's stomach turned. Then the cave-in, he said. Then the coffins. Then I saw the paperwork after. Numbers for load and depth that I hadn't seen before. Corrections scrawled in smaller hands. They'd altered it after I signed, pushed beyond what I'd agreed. Used my signature as a shield. And you didn't speak, she said. They would have buried me by. Two, he said. Not under rock, under whispers. Drunk, disgruntled, looking for someone to blame. Men like me don't stand up to men like Sutton and live comfortable. So you cashed the money, she said, buried your brother, drank, and let widows like me sit in rooms with black borders and no explanations. Yes, he said. The word was a stone in his mouth. Her hand closed around the back of the chair so tightly her knuckles ached. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because you need to ease your conscience before you ride off on some heroic errand. Because if I walk into Denver with those papers and they ask me how I got them and what my part was, I'm going to tell them, he said, all of it. And if I lay myself bare to strangers, I owe you the truth first. Her eyes burned. You owe me more than that, she said. I know, he replied. The cabin was very quiet. Rosie's breathing rasped behind them. The stove ticked. Outside, the wind ran cold fingers along the walls. I want to hate you, Nora whispered. All the way down. I want to believe you're just another man who took what he was given and looked the other way. That would be easier. I'd like to hate me too, he said. But I don't, she said, voice cracking. Not only because you're here, because you pulled my girls up this trail when no one else would. Because you've swung an axe and carried water and stood between us and Sutton. With a rifle, you could have pointed the other way. She shook her head, tears spilling hot down her cheeks. I don't know what to do with that, she said. With the man who signed my husband's death warrant and the man who keeps my daughters warm being the same person. He swallowed hard. You don't have to forgive me, he said. Ever. There are some things that don't get washed off. He took a step closer, then stopped himself. But if there's any part of you that can see past what I was to what I'm trying to be, he said, let me do this. Let me take the notebook and the maps and my own damn guilt and put them where they might hurt Sutton more than they hurt you. She looked at him, at his tired eyes, at the way his hands shook just slightly, not from drink, but from what he was offering to walk into. How long, she asked. As long as it takes, he said. A week if the weather holds. 2 if it doesn't. More if men in suits decide they like the taste of power better than the taste of justice. And if you don't come back, she asked, then you'll know the company didn't like being poked, he said, and you'll have Miguel and Chen and that mine, and the knowledge that somewhere in the Capitol there's a stack of papers with Sutton's sins laid out in ink. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her cheeks were wet, but her gaze was steady. You take the notebook, she said, and the piece, and anything else that ties him to what happened up here. His breath left him in a rush. But hear me, Caleb Rowe, she said. If you vanish into that city and never send word, never send a scrap of news, I will not sit here and mourn you like some tragic hero. I will put your name in the same ledger as Sutton's. Do you understand me? He nodded. I'd expect nothing less, he said. She reached for Thomas's notebook, fingers lingering on the worn cover. For a moment, she pressed it to her chest. Then she held it out. He took it with both hands, as if it were heavier than it looked. You'll need a copy, he said, in case this one disappears. I have the words, she said. Up here, she tapped her temple, and here, she touched her heart. He nodded. He turned toward the door, then hesitated once more. Nora, he said. Yes, I meant what I said, he said, about not wanting to live like this anymore, about wanting to be something other than the man who signed that paper. She looked at him a long moment. Then B, she said, don't just talk about it on your way out. He almost smiled. I'll see what I can manage, he said. He went to the girls, brushed a hand lightly over Rosie's hair and without quite touching, nodded to Annie, who stared up at him with a mix of distrust and something like hope. Keep the fire fed, Mom, he told Annie. Help your mother. I already do, she said. He gave her a short, reverent bow. Then he slung his pack over his shoulder, tucked the notebook inside his coat, and stepped out into the cold. From the doorway, Nora watched him ride away, the shape of him growing smaller against the snow. The mountain swallowed him, the trail curling out of sight. She closed the door, leaned her forehead against the rough wood, and let herself ache for 3 breaths. Then she turned back to the bunk, to Rosie's hot skin, to Annie's frightened eyes, to the cabin that shook with every gust. Come on, she whispered, brushing damp curls from her younger daughter's face. Hold on. Your father believed in this place. I'm trying to believe in it too. Don't make me do it without you. Outside, the wind shifted. Down in Silverton, Sutton received a telegram from a man in Denver he thought he owned. Up on the ridge, Miguel Santos looked toward Anvil Creek and wondered which ghost he would be feeding next. And somewhere between, on the frozen road that wound its way out of the San Juan Mountains toward the wider world, Caleb Rowe rode with a dead man's words in his pocket and a choice heavy on his back run from his sins. Or finally, truly walk straight into them. For 3 days after Caleb rode away, time in the cabin stretched and snapped like old rope. Rosie's fever rose and fell in waves. Some hours she dozed, skin slick with sweat. Others she burned so hot Nora could feel the heat from inches away. Annie fetched water, wrung cloths, stirred thin broth over the stove without being asked. Her small jaw set in a way that made Nora's chest hurt. Outside, the sky changed from pewter to a hard, brittle blue. Snow on the roof slid and thumped. The world went on. Inside, it felt like everything paused around one small, struggling breath. On the third night, when the wind had died and the stars outside burned too cold, someone knocked on the cabin door. Nora's hand went to the rifle before her mind caught up. "Who is it?" she called. There was a pause. "A man who owes Thomas Kane more than he can pay," a voice answered, "and who'd rather not be shot through the door for coming." The accent was familiar from the notebook. Clipped, with rolled R's. Mexican. Thomas had written once in the margins. Good with rock. Nora cracked the door. The man outside was wrapped in a rough coat dusted with snow. His hair was black, threaded with gray at the temples. His face was lean, sun-browned, lined in a way that spoke of long days and hard work. His eyes were dark and wary. "I'm Miguel Santos," he said. "We talked in town, your man and I." He hesitated over the word. "Caleb," Nora said. He flicked a glance past her shoulder, taking in the bunk, the stove, the limp shape of Rosie under blankets. He said the girls were sick. Miguel murmured, "Sick kids and snow don't mix well." "May I come in?" Nora stepped aside. He stamped the snow from his boots and shut the door behind him, cutting off the thin line of cold. Up close, he smelled of wood smoke and metal. His hands, when he pulled off his gloves, were scarred, nails short and broken. "Thomas wrote about you," Nora said. Miguel's mouth tightened. "He wrote about everyone," he said quietly. He was that kind of man. He went to the bunk, crouched near Rosie without touching her. "She's burning," he said. "Her lungs, she coughs until she can't breathe." Nora said, "Sometimes there's a sound." Her throat closed. Miguel nodded, face grave. "There is a woman in town," he said. "Mrs. Chen. She knows more about breathing sickness than most doctors. Helped half the camp through when something ugly went around last spring. If anyone can ease that, it's her." "We can't take Rosie down," Nora said automatically. "She won't make it. And if I walk off this mountain, Sutton will say I've abandoned the claim." Miguel shrugged one shoulder. "You won't be gone forever," he said. "And even the company doesn't like being seen stealing dirt from under a child. Not with everyone watching. I've seen what they're willing to be seen doing," Nora said. Miguel's gaze sharpened. "You think you're the only one?" he asked. She flinched at the heat in his voice. He blew out a breath, reining it in. "Thomas pulled me out of a hole once," he said more quietly. "Not in the rock. In the office, they wanted to fire me for saying the supports were bad. He argued, got them to keep me on. Cost him overtime. Cost him a bonus he could have used." He glanced at Rosie again. "I don't like Ro," he said. "I don't forgive him. But I don't hate Thomas. And I don't like watching a man's work die with his child when there's something that could be done." Nora rubbed her temple. "What are you asking me to do?" she asked. "I'll help you bring the girl down to Chen," Miguel said. "You leave the cabin locked. You leave a light burning. You come back as soon as you can. I'll keep an eye on it while you're gone. Make sure no one finds it empty and decides it's free for the taking." "You'd do that?" she asked. He gave a small, rough laugh. "I'm not doing it for you," he said. "I'm doing it for him. And for me, Consolidated took enough from us. They don't get this for free." Nora looked at Rosie, at her flushed cheeks, her fluttering eyelids. Fear dug claws into her chest. "Annie," she said. "Yes," Mama Annie answered, eyes too old. "Get your boots," Nora said. "Wrap Rosie in the warmest blanket. We're going to town." To The trail down the mountain was worse with a child in arms. Miguel took Rosie, cradling her against his chest inside his coat. Nora walked close, ready to catch, ready to fall with them if he slipped. Annie trudged behind, small legs working, face set. The cold cut through everything. Nora's toes went numb. Her lungs burned with every breath. Rosie's fever made her a small furnace against Miguel, heat leaching into his bones even as the wind tried to steal it. By the time Silverton's buildings came into view, low roofs huddled together. Nora's legs felt like they were made of glass. Mrs. Chen's boarding house was not on the main street. It stood at the edge of the Chinese Quarter, where the buildings were narrower, the signs painted with characters Nora could not read, the smells of cooking unfamiliar and sharp. Mrs. Chen answered the door herself. She was small, with hair wound into a bun, hands strong and lined. Her eyes took in the shivering trio, the way Miguel carried Rosie, and something in her face softened. "Inside," she said, quickly. "Don't let the cold finish what the sickness started." Her English was accented, but clear. She ushered them into a warm kitchen that smelled of ginger and something bitter. A fire burned in the stove. A kettle hissed softly. "Put her here, Mrs. Chen said, patting a narrow bed in the corner. Miguel laid Rosie down gently. The child turned her face toward the wall, breath shallow. Mrs. Chen's hands were sure as she checked Rosie's throat, her chest, the inside of her eyelids. "Lungs heavy," she said. "Not good, but not gone yet." She glanced at Nora. "You stay," she said. "Help. I will need more water, more wood. Your other girl, Annie, she can sleep in the next room. Miguel, you go." He frowned. "Go where he asked." "Back up the mountain," she said. "You said you would watch the cabin." "Do that." "I do this." Miguel nodded slowly. "I'll be back," he told Nora, "to check on her and on what's mine to watch." He left quietly. Mrs. Chen mixed herbs, their smells sharp and strange, and boiled them into a dark tea. "Not good," she repeated, tipping a spoonful into Rosie's mouth. "But I have seen worse come back. We keep her warm. We keep her breathing. We see." Nora sat by the bed, fingers laced through Rosie's small hand, and tried not to break. Miguel heard the plan the next day. He'd gone to the livery to see about a mule. If Nora and the girls needed more supplies or a way off this mountain in a hurry, he'd need an animal that knew the trail. The livery was half stall, half gossip hall. Men leaned on fence rails, chewing on straw and grievances. The air smelled of hay, manure, and tobacco. Miguel kept his head down, listening. "Sutton says let 'em freeze," one man was saying, voice low. "Less paperwork that way. Widow and her brats die up there in a snowslide. Sheriff writes it up neat. Company applies for the abandoned claim. Bang. Done." Miguel's spine went rigid. Another man laughed nervously. "You sure that's wise?" he asked. "People talk. They always talk," the first said. "They'll talk faster if Sutton drags a lady into court. This way, it's between God and the mountain. Who's to blame a drift for caving or a cabin for catching? Fire hell. The sheriff already told her she was crazy to go up." Miguel's hands curled into fists. "Besides," the first man added, "Sutton says if she gets in the way of the big work, that's on her. You stand in front of a train, you can't complain, you got run down." The other grunted. Miguel walked away before they saw his face. His heart hammered against his ribs as he strode through the snow, heading not for the cabin, but for Mrs. Chen's. Nora was standing outside when he arrived, coat drawn tight, breath clouding. "She's sleeping," she said before he could ask. "Fever's down a little." He nodded. "That's good," he said. Her eyes narrowed. What she asked. "You look like you've eaten something foul." He stopped a few paces away. "I heard men talking at the livery," he said. "About you. About me," she repeated. Sutton has a plan, Miguel said. He'd rather not fight you in a room where anyone can write down his lies. He'd rather the mountain take you. Freeze. Fall. Fire. Then the sheriff stamps abandoned on your claim, and Consolidated walks in with clean hands. Nora's fingers dug into the railing so hard the wood creaked. So the law was never the real game to him, she said softly. Just a curtain. Miguel nodded. He'll use it if he has to, he said. But he doesn't like being told no. Men like that don't. Nora looked past him, up the valley where the ridge of Anvil Creek cut against the sky. What are you going to do? Miguel asked. She let out a long breath. What I've been doing, she said. Stay, dig, breathe. Make it as hard as possible for him to get what he wants, no matter how he comes at it. She looked back at him. But I won't be surprised now, she added. That's something. Miguel studied her for a moment. I'll go back up, he said. Work the mine while he thinks you're here. Be an extra pair of eyes. You stay with Rosie until she can walk without falling. Then you come back. We keep the claim alive. Mrs. Kane. If nothing else, but it'll irritate him. A faint smile flickered. I like the way you think, she said. Caleb reached Denver with a cough in his chest and frost in his beard. The city was a different kind of harsh, where Silverton clung to a mountain. Denver sprawled across a plain, its streets a grid of mud and ambition. Smoke from chimneys and factories smeared the sky. Men in suits hurried past men in patched coats. Carriages splashed slush on everyone. Caleb tied his horse at a livery on the edge of town, patted the animal's neck in apology, and walked toward the part of the city where decisions were made. The newspaper office was louder than he'd expected. Men shouted over each other. A press clanked and groaned in the back. Papers rustled like restless birds. He waited until a man in shirt sleeves and a loosened tie barked. Next, in his general direction, I have something you'll want to see, Caleb said, putting Thomas's notebook on the counter. The man glanced down. We get that every day, he said. What is it this time, Bigfoot's confession? The governor's mistress. Proof Consolidated Silver cut corners that killed 12 men on Anvil Creek, Caleb said, and that they're trying to steal what's left from a widow. That got the man's attention. He frowned, flipped the notebook open, skimmed a few lines. You write this? He asked. No, Caleb said. A dead man did. Convenient, the man muttered. And who are you, Caleb Rowe? He said. I was the company engineer on that drift. The man's eyes snapped up. You're confessing you killed those men, he asked. I'm confessing I signed off on numbers that were changed later, Caleb said, and that Asher Sutton paid me to look the other way. A hush spread within arm's length, like a stone had dropped in the noisy room. The man behind the counter chewed the inside of his cheek. Wait here, he said. He took the notebook and disappeared into an office at the back. Minutes stretched. Caleb shifted his weight from one foot to the other, staring at the ink-stained floorboards, hands shaking just enough to notice. He thought of turning around, of walking out into the street and letting the city swallow him, of riding until the mountains were a line behind him and no one knew his name. The office door opened. A different man emerged this time. Older, leaner. His hair was thin, his eyes sharp as nails. You're Rowe, he asked. Yes, Caleb said. I'm editor here, the man said. Name's Harrigan. You understand what happens if we print your story. Consolidated gets angry. Caleb said. Sutton throws tantrums. Maybe I get a bullet in the back of my head one night. Or sued, Harrigan said. Possibly both. This isn't some little squabble over grazing rights. This is a corporation with holdings in half the state. He tapped the notebook. What you have here is interesting, he went on. Compelling, even. But it's also the word of a dead miner and a drunk engineer against a company everyone believes keeps this territory afloat. Caleb's jaw clenched. I'm not drunk anymore, he said. Good for you, Harrigan said. Not unkindly, but that's not enough. You willing to sign a statement, sworn, with your name, your role, the money you took? Caleb swallowed. Yes, he said. You willing to testify if it comes to that? Harrigan pressed. In a room full of men who'd like you to shut up and go away, Caleb met his gaze. Yes, he said again. Harrigan studied him. Why, he asked. Most men would take their guilt to the grave and hope the priest talked louder at the funeral. Caleb thought of Nora standing in the doorway of the cabin, of the way her voice had trembled when she said she wanted to hate him and couldn't manage it completely. I'm tired, he said, of being the kind of man who signs things and pretends his hands are clean. Oh, there's a woman up on that mountain who's colder and braver than I am. I'm not going to let her stand alone if I can help it. Harrigan's mouth twitched. Well, he said, that's the first useful thing I've heard all week. He nodded toward another room. Come with me, he said. We'll take your statement. I know a lawyer who likes sharpening knives on big names, and there's a state senator who's been looking for a cause since the last one got boring. Let's see if silver can still tarnish. 2 days later, a telegraph clerk in Silverton handed a folded slip to Nora in Mrs. Chen's kitchen. Rosie was propped up on pillows now, cheeks less flushed, eyes half open. The herbal teas had dragged the fever down from its peak, though a cough still rattled deep in her chest. Nora wiped her hands on a cloth and took the paper, heart pounding at the sight of the sender line. Denver office. Harrigan, also row. She unfolded it. Investigation open, stop. Consolidated practices. Anvil Creek under review. Stop, Senator Wilkes requested testimony. Stop, expect warrant Sutton within weeks. Stop, hold, firm, stop, do not sell. Stop, coming back as soon as can. Stop, Caleb. The words blurred for a moment. Mrs. Chen asked, peering over her shoulder. Good news some, Nora said. She read it again, slowly. Investigation opened. Warrant within weeks. Hold firm. Coming back. Hope flickered in her chest. Small and wary, like a match in wind. Does that mean we win? Annie asked from the doorway, where she'd been eavesdropping as only children can. It means the fight isn't just up here anymore, Nora said. It's in rooms Sutton can't lock. Annie frowned. But he's still here, she said. In town. Yes, Nora said. And he won't like knowing other men are reading his name in ugly sentences. She folded the telegram carefully and tucked it into her skirt pocket. That makes him dangerous, she said. More than before. We need to be ready for him to strike harder. Can't we just leave? Annie whispered. Now that someone in Denver knows, can't we go home? Nora looked at Rosie, at the thinness of her wrists, at the way she clutched the blanket even in sleep. Where is home? Annie, she asked. Annie's mouth opened, then closed. Nora exhaled. I don't know yet, she said. But I know this: if we leave now, we hand him the one thing your father still has a grip on. I won't do that. Not without making him sweat first. Weeks became a rhythm. Nora split herself between Mrs. Chen's boarding house and the cabin on Anvil Creek. Rosie grew stronger slowly, the rattle in her chest easing, color returning to her face. Mrs. Chen kept a close eye, clucking under her breath when Nora tried to rush anything. Mountain did this, she said. Mountain will take time to give it back. Don't pull seedlings too fast or you break them. Annie became Mrs. Chen's little shadow, learning how to chop vegetables, how to scrub pots, how to listen between languages. She picked up a few phrases of Chinese so quickly, Nora suspected children's brains were made of something more flexible than adult ones. Up on the mountain, Miguel worked. He and Nora took shifts once Rosie was well enough that Nora could leave her for a few hours at a time. They hacked at the face of the vein, carried ore out in sacks, stacked it in neat pile. It was exhausting, dirty, dangerous work. It was also, in a strange way, cleansing. Every rock they broke felt like a small act of defiance. Every chunk of ore pulled free was a piece of proof Thomas had not been chasing ghosts. He'd seen something real. One crisp morning, as they leaned on their shovels and looked at the growing stack of sacked ore, Miguel whistled low. "That's enough to fill a wagon," he said. Nora nodded, wiping sweat from her brow at the back of her wrist. "It won't break Sutton," she said, "but it will buy us time." "And guns," Miguel said dryly. She gave him a look. "I thought you didn't like guns," she said. "I don't," he replied, "but I like being shot less." They loaded the ore over the next 2 days, working until their arms screamed. Mrs. Chen insisted Nora keep Rosie in town for now. "You go," she told Nora firmly. "Take the older one or not, as you wish. I will keep the little bird here. She will not fly away." Annie bristled at being called the older one like that was a substitute for being spared. "I can help," she said. "I can sit on the wagon like a sack and watch." Nora hesitated. Having Annie with her would ease one sharp fear and sharpen another. "Stay," she said at last. "With your sister. With Mrs. Chen. Help her. I'll be faster without worrying about you bouncing off the back of a wheel." Annie crossed her arms. "You'll worry anyway," she muttered. "Yes," Nora said, "but I won't be picturing you under a horse." Miguel watched the exchange, eyes softening. "She's right, you know," he said later, as they tied the last knots. "You'll worry either way." "I'm a mother," Nora said. "It's my occupation." Yeah. The road to Ouray was narrow, cut into the side of the mountain like a scar. It wound along cliffs and through dense stands of pine, the wagon wheels squeaking, the mule's breath puffing in steady clouds. Miguel walked ahead, rifle slung over his shoulder, scanning the tree line. Nora sat on the wagon seat, reins in hand, body attuned to every shift of the load behind her. They were halfway to a sheltered pass when the mule stopped dead. "Come on," Nora murmured, flicking the reins gently. The animal's ears pricked forward. It snorted, stomping. Miguel lifted a hand. "Easy," he said. "Something's ahead." A moment later, the something stepped into view. 3 men, company coats, guns visible, holstered but not at rest. Nora's stomach dropped. Miguel's hand drifted toward his rifle. The tallest of the 3 smiled. "Afternoon," Auntie said. "Hell of a day for a drive." Nora kept her own hands visible. "Road seems crowded," she said. "Forest's big," he replied. "Lots of places to be. We just happen to be here." Miguel shifted his weight. "You're blocking the path," he said. "Are we?" the man asked mildly. "Must be the snow. Hard to see lines." He nodded toward the wagon. "What's in the sacks?" he asked, though his tone said he already knew. "Rocks," Nora said. He laughed. "Sure, sir," he said. "Heavy, shiny rocks that pay for nice things." He hooked his thumbs into his belt. "Mr. Sutton heard you were planning a little trip," he went on. "He's concerned. Road's dangerous. Accidents happen. Be a shame if something had slipped." Miguel's grip tightened on his rifle. "You planning on making an accident?" he asked. "Now, why would we do that?" the man replied. "We're just here to advise caution." Behind him, one of the others snickered. Nora's mind raced. If they pushed through, someone would get hurt. If they turned back, they'd lose time and the ore might as well have stayed in the mountain. "Mr. Sutton wants to talk," the man said. "Proper like, in town, face to face. He says if Miss Kane comes now and has a conversation like civilized people, he might be inclined to let this little venture proceed." "And if I don't?" Nora asked. The man's smile thinned. "Then the road stays crowded," he said. "And mules are such skittish beasts." He looked at Miguel. "You can go on," he added. "If the lady agrees. 1 man in a wagon's hard to stop on this narrow track. Wouldn't want to risk it." Nora heard the words beneath the words. If she went back to town with them, Miguel and the ore might slip through while Sutton's eyes were elsewhere. If she refused, No one went anywhere. Miguel glanced at her. You don't have to, he said. We can find another route. How many routes do you know? The man asked pleasantly. We know them all. Nora thought of Annie, of Rosie, of the cabin, of Thomas's notebook, of Caleb in Denver, pushing his guilt into ink in rooms that smelled of paper and power. She thought of Sutton reading a warrant with his name on it and still having men in coats like this to do his work. She took a breath. I'll go, she said. Miguel stiffened. Nora, he began. She cut him off with a look. You said yourself Sutton hates not owning things. She said, he wants my attention more than he wants this wagon. Give it to him. While you take something he wants more. Miguel's jaw worked. You sure? He asked. No, she said, but I'm doing it anyway. She climbed down from the wagon. The man's smile grew. Wise woman, he said. Mr. Sutton will be pleased. He jerked his head at one of his companions. Ride behind, he told him. Make sure she doesn't get lost. Miguel stepped close to Nora. I'll get the ore to Ure, he said quietly. I'll sell it for every cent it's worth. I'll bring back powder and food and whatever else you need to make his life difficult. You make it back, she said. Alive. That's what you bring back. He gave her a brief, fierce nod. She watched the wagon creak past the blockade. Miguel's shoulders square as he led the mule on. Then she turned and walked down the path towards Silverton, company man at her back. Her hands felt strangely light without the reins. Her heart weighed a ton. Sutton didn't meet her at the office. He made her wait. She sat in a high-backed chair in the outer room, fingers clenched in her lap, while his clerk pretended to shuffle papers that clearly had no writing on them. The clock on the wall ticked loudly, each second a tap on her nerves. She imagined Miguel guiding the wagon along the mountain road, every bend a possible ambush. She imagined Annie at Mrs. Chen's, pacing by the window, Rosie napping, hair damp from washing. At last, the inner door opened. Mrs. Kane, Sutton said smoothly, so good of you to come. She stood. Your men made it very clear it wasn't a request, she said. He smiled. Sometimes urgency is hard to couch in polite terms. He said, please, come in. The inner office was warm, wood-paneled, lined with maps. A decanter of amber liquid sat on a side table, 2 glasses beside it. Sutton gestured toward a chair. She remained standing. You sent armed men to stop my wagon, she said. I sent concerned employees to ensure a citizen of this town wasn't risking life and limb unnecessarily. He said, there's a difference in a... You want to buy my claim, she said. You want to stop me from moving what's mine? May that, at least. He poured himself a drink, the liquid catching the light. I want to prevent misunderstanding, he said. Between you and the company, between you and the law. He swirled the whiskey. I hear the telegraph wires hum. He went on. News from Denver. Men with nothing better to do looking into safety issues. It's all very theatrical. You're under investigation, Nora said. You and Consolidated. Senator Wilkes has your name on his desk. Sutton's jaw tightened for the first time. Roe's been busy, he said. He has, she said. And so have I. He took a slow sip. You think a few ink-stained hands and a puffed-up politician scare me, he asked. I have weathered panics before. Markets rise and fall. Papers flutter and burn. Men like Wilkes use us to climb, and then they forget our names when they get where they're going. He set the glass down. What I care about, he said, is leverage. You have some? I have more. I'm offering you a chance to trade yours for something tangible. $10,000. Safe passage for you and your girls back east. No more winter in a shack. No more wondering if the next storm will be the one that takes the roof. Nora's nails bit into her palms. My girls are not a bargaining chip, she said. They're not pieces on a board you can move by dangling threats. Everything is a bargaining chip if you're hungry enough, he said. You should know that by now. She leaned forward slightly. I know this, she said. You can send men to block roads. You can whisper in the sheriff's ear. You can scribble numbers on paper and call them truth. But the more you push, the more eyes turn to watch. You think you can bury me on that mountain? Maybe you can. But you won't bury the story. Not now. He studied her. Spoken like a woman who's been spending time with newspapermen. He said, careful, Mrs. Kane. They'll turn you into a headline one day and then forget you the next. He smiled without warmth. Think about my offer, he said. Not for you, for Annie and Rosie. Do you want them growing up with black dust in their lungs and ice in their bones? Or in a place where curtains are for shade and not to keep drafts out? Her breath hitched at the sound of her daughter's names in his mouth. How did you? She began. He waved a hand. This is a small town, he said. Children's names travel, which is why you should be careful where you leave them. A chill, colder than the wind outside, slid down her spine. What does that mean? She asked. He glanced at the clock. It means you've kept me from other business long enough, he said. We will talk again. After you have had time to consider how much the mountain really loves you. He turned away, signaling the conversation was over. The urge to reach for the decanter and smash it over his skull was strong and sudden. Instead, Nora turned and walked out. The clerk outside gave her a thin smile. His hand trembled slightly as he put a paper in a drawer. She didn't stop to read his fear. She stepped into the street. The sky had darkened, clouds piling up over the peaks. A wind had kicked up, swirling grit. She hurried toward Mrs. Chen's, boots skidding on packed snow. She saw the broken door before she saw anything else. It hung crooked on one hinge. Wood splintered where the lock had been. Nora's heart slammed against her ribs. She ran. Annie, she shouted. Rosie inside. Chairs were overturned. A bowl lay shattered on the floor, soup soaking into the wood. Mrs. Chen sat on the stairs, one hand pressed to her cheek, an angry bruise blooming beneath her eye. Where are they? Nora gasped. Mrs. Chen looked up, eyes wet and furious. Men came, she said. Company coats. Said you sent them? I said no. They pushed past. Took the girls. Said Mr. Sutton wanted to keep them safe until you decided to stop being foolish. The room tilted. For a moment, everything went silent except for Nora's own pounding pulse. She saw Annie's stubborn chin lifting as rough hands grabbed her. Rosie coughing, calling for her mother. Mrs. Chen fighting and being thrown aside. Nora's vision tunneled. Where, she said, each word dragged out of her throat. Did they take them? I don't know. No, Mrs. Chen said. They mentioned the rail yards. Something about an evening train. Nora turned and walked back out into the street. The cold hit her like a slap. On the corner, a boy in a telegraph cap was scanning passing faces, a folded slip in his hand. Mrs. Kane, he called. Mrs. Nora Kane, she stopped. Yes, she said. He held out the slip. Message for you, he said. Just came in. Her fingers shook as she took it. Another witness coming. Denver with statement. Stop, keep girls close. Stop, Sutton cornered gets cruel. Stop, do not be alone with phone. Stop, see. The irony was so sharp it made her choke. She crumpled the paper in her fist. Too late. At the edge of town, she could hear the faint clatter of couplings, the hiss of steam. Nora's feet moved before she fully decided to go. Past Mrs. Chen's, past the sheriff's office, past the saloon where Caleb had been slumped in shadow weeks ago, down to the rail yard, where tracks spidered out and trains came and went like metal ghosts. The evening train sat idling, steam billowing, cars lined up like a row of teeth. Men in uniforms moved along the platform, checking couplings, shouting. Nora slipped between stacks of crates, heart hammering. She saw them near the baggage car, two company men, two small figures between them. Annie, face pale, chin lifted, eyes blazing. Rosie, clinging to her sister's hand, eyes wet but no longer crying, as if tears had frozen into something else. "I want my mother," Annie said, voice high and clear. "You'll see her," one of the men said, patting her head mockingly. "Once she learns to be sensible." Nora's vision went red. She moved along the tracks, boots crunching quietly on gravel, until she was under the trestle that led over the yard. The ladder there was old, iron rungs slick with ice. She climbed anyway. At the top, the trestle was a narrow walkway with a low rail. Below, the yard spread out tracks gleaming, men moving, steam swirling. She could see the baggage car roof from here. The men, her daughters. She lay down on her stomach, breath puffing in little clouds, and crawled forward until the wooden planks creaked under her weight. Her hands shook as she brought the rifle up. The distance wasn't far. She'd shot rabbits at longer range. Sutton wasn't there. Not in person, but his orders were. His men were his reach. If she took one of them down, the others might flinch. They might let go. The yard would erupt. Someone would shout her name. The sheriff might come running, or they might just fire back and add her body to the list of things that had gone missing in the mountains. She sighted down the barrel. The front sight settled, almost of its own accord, on the chest of the man holding Annie's arm. The world narrowed. She heard the train's boiler hiss, the faint clank of metal, the wind whining through the beams. She heard, in memory, Sutton's voice. "Do you want them growing up with black dust in their lungs?" She heard Caleb. "You don't have to forgive me, but let me do this." She heard Thomas hold it for the girls. Her finger slid toward the trigger. For one suspended heartbeat, everything went still. If she pulled now, she might stop this, or she might set loose something worse. She might make herself into exactly the kind of story Sutton needed to twist hysterical widow with a gun. Dangerous, unstable, proof that the company had only ever tried to help. Annie's face tipped up, as if she sensed, something. For a second, their eyes met across the yard, across the air, through the weave of steam and noise. Mama Annie mouthed. Nora's breath hitched. She lowered the rifle, slowly, carefully. Her hands were numb. Her arms shook. She backed away from the edge, each inch feeling like she was pulling herself out of a hole. By the time she climbed down, her knees were jelly. She did not fire a shot. Not because she didn't want to, because she wanted more than a bullet. She wanted Sutton stripped, not martyred, exposed, not killed in a way that made him a victim in the eyes of men who already liked his company more than her existence. But she still had to get her daughters back in. When she walked onto the platform a few minutes later, shoulders squared, rifle slung over her back, the men's hands went to their pistols. "Easy," she called. "I'm here." Annie's head whipped around. "Mama," she cried. Rosie sagged with relief. The company man's mouth curved. "Decided to be sensible?" he asked. "I decided I want to look you in the eye while we talk," she said. "Not from a rooftop." His gaze flicked upward, suspicion flaring. But he saw nothing now except steam and sky. "Mr. Sutton wants you to understand," he said, "that until the situation with the claim is resolved, your daughters will be guests of the company. For their own safety. Folks like to say things when they see children on a mountain trail. For their safety." Nora repeated, "Is that what you call it when you snatch them from a kitchen?" "They were in an unsafe environment," he replied, "near the Chinese Quarter. You know how people talk. I know how men like you talk," she said. He shrugged. "You want them back," he said. "You sign, you sell, you walk away. Simple." Her skin crawled. Behind him, the train whistle blew once, a warning. "What if I don't sign?" she asked. He smiled thinly. "Train leaves in 5 minutes," he said. They'll be comfortable in Denver or somewhere farther. Orphanages love fresh faces. Her jaw clenched. We're not your property, she said. None of us. Right now, he said, I have paper that says otherwise. Guardianship, protective custody. Sheriff signed it himself. You want to fight that in court while your girls sit in a dormitory somewhere, or you want to take the money, take their hands, and disappear into a place where my name doesn't echo. He held out a folded document. The words on it meant nothing in that moment. Lines, loops, ink. Behind him, Annie's fingers were white around Rosie's. The train hissed again. Nora's choice rose in her like bile. She could refuse. She could scream. She could fire now and watch everything burn down around her. Or she could bend long enough to get her children back. And then find another way to make them bleed. Slowly, she reached for the paper. Fine, she said. I'll sign. The man's smile widened. But, she added, I want them off this platform first. Here. Next to me, I sign nothing while they're in your reach. He hesitated. Company policy, he began, doesn't apply to a woman who just agreed to hand you a fortune. She cut in. You want my name that badly? Prove you don't need their necks under your boot to get it. There was a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe respect. Maybe annoyance. He jerked his head. Bring them, he told the other guard. Annie pulled Rosie along, eyes glued to her mother. When they reached Nora, she dropped to her knees and pulled them both in, arms shaking. Are you hurt? She whispered. No, Annie gasped. Not yet. They said they'd put us on a train, Rosie murmured. Not today, Nora said. She looked up at the man holding the papers. Pen, she said. He handed her one, smugness returning. She unfolded the document. The words swam for a moment, then focused. It wasn't a sale contract. It was an agreement to consider an offer. Legalese. Traps. It did not yet sign away the claim. It did, however, acknowledge that Sutton had temporary guardianship over Annie and Rosie. Her grip tightened. She met the man's eyes. This is not a deed, she said. It's a start, he said. Something to show the judge. Something to show Sutton that you're reasonable. Then it's not worth the ink, she said. She tore it in half, then in half again. Shreds of paper fluttered to the platform. The man froze. The whistle screamed. Get your hands off my children, Nora said quietly. Or I swear to you, by every rock on that mountain and every paper in Denver with your boss's name on it, I will turn this town into a story you don't survive. He stared at her, something like fear finally slipping through. People on the platform had turned to look now. Faces peered from windows. The sheriff, drawn by the noise, stood at the edge of the yard, uncertain. Sutton's man flicked a glance at him, then at the watching eyes, then back at Nora. He let out a breath through his nose. Fine, he said. Take them. For now. But you just made things harder. For you, she said. Good. He stepped back. Annie clung to Nora's coat. Rosie tucked herself under her arm. The train began to move, jerking, churning. As the cars clattered past, Nora stood very still. She had refused the paper. She had walked her daughters off the platform. She had also lit a fuse. Somewhere between Silverton and Denver, Caleb Rowe rode with a notebook and a sworn statement. Miguel Santos guided a wagon load of ore toward Ouray, money for powder and food waiting on the other side of the pass. And Asher Sutton, cornered between law and a woman who wouldn't fold, began to think very seriously about what accidents might befall a cabin on a mountain where no one was watching. Nora felt the wind shift. She tightened her arms around Annie and Rosie and lifted her chin. Come on, she said. We've got letters to write. Behind her fury, a plan was forming. If Sutton wanted to play with paper, she'd give him more than he could swallow. She'd put his name in ink on every ugly thing he'd done. and then she'd send it down the mountain with the one man who knew exactly how much rock it took to bury someone and had chosen, at last, not to. The letter took 3 nights. Nora wrote it at the small cabin table after Annie and Rosie were asleep, fingers cramped around the pen, eyes burning from the strain of holding rage steady enough to form words. She didn't soften anything. She wrote about the day the notice arrived in Boston, the polite phrasing of 12 deaths. She wrote about the telegram that followed, Thomas's last message fighting its way through wires and negligence to land in her shaking hands. She wrote about Sutton coming to the cabin before the cave-in, notebook in his pocket, smile in place, threat disguised as concern. She described the drift on Anvil Creek, the supports Thomas had begged for, the corners that had been cut because someone in an office had decided rock was just numbers on a page. She wrote about the cave-in, about the way the company called it an act of God, even as they cashed the checks the ore had bought. She wrote about the trip west with 2 small girls and not enough money, about the doors that had shut in her face, about the sheriff's suggestion of orphan trains. She wrote about Sutton riding up to her cabin again, about the offer to buy, about the thinly veiled threat wrapped around the word accident. She wrote about the men in company coats who had grabbed her daughters from Mrs. Chen's kitchen. And she wrote about the train platform, the torn paper, the way the men had let go of Annie's arm only when the town was watching, the cold promise in their eyes when they said for now. When she had nothing left, she signed her name, Nora Kane, widow of Thomas Kane, owner of the Kane claim on Anvil Creek. She made 2 copies, hand cramping, ink blotting where her grip tightened, and tucked Thomas's notebook pages into one of them. Miguel read the first page in silence when she handed it to him. They stood outside the cabin in the thin light of late afternoon. The sky stretched taut and pale overhead. The newspaper in Denver has some of this already, Nora said. From Caleb, but they don't have what happened here since he left. They don't have my piece. Wait, Miguel glanced up. You want me to bring this to him, he asked. To him, to Harrigan, to anyone who will listen, she said. You said you'd take the ore money and buy what we need. Powder, food, tools. Take this too. Let them see Sutton's not just dangerous underground. He's dangerous in the streets. Miguel folded the letter carefully. You're trusting a lot of paper to a man who doesn't like one of your allies, he said. I'm trusting a man my husband trusted, she said. That's worth more to me than liking. He slid the letter inside his coat, next to his skin. I'll go when the pass is clear enough, he said. Road's been ugly since the last storm. Soon, she said, before Sutton decides he's waited long enough for things to go his way. Miguel nodded. He doesn't like being told no, he said. I've noticed, Nora replied. They both looked up the slope, toward the mine mouth, where the dark cut in the rock made a square of shadow against the snow. The mountain loomed over them, silent and patient. Caleb reached Silverton before Miguel reached Denver. He came in on a pale morning, horse-blown and sides lathered, clothes crusted with road dust and the fine coal that clung to everything in the city. Telegraph news had traveled faster than he could. By the time he rode down the main street, eyes burned and throat raw from days of talk and smoke. Small knots of men were already murmuring over crumpled copies of the Denver paper on porches. Consolidated under inquiry, one headline read, Engineer admits falsified records. His own name was there, buried in columns of type. So was Thomas's. So was Anvil Creek. Some men spat when they saw him. Others just stared. He did not stop to argue with either. He left his horse at the livery with a word and an exhausted pat and walked straight to the sheriff's office, boots scraping on the wooden steps. The sheriff looked up from his ledger as Caleb pushed the door open. Well, he drawled, the prodigal engineer. You've been busy. Caleb slapped a folded sheaf of papers onto the desk. United States Marshal's warrant, he said. Signed in Denver. For Asher Sutton, on suspicion of fraud, criminal negligence, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The sheriff stared at the seal, then at Caleb. You brought trouble, he said. I brought the law, Caleb answered. What you do with it is up to you. The sheriff chewed on that. Man's got money, he said. Friends, lawyers. Caleb shrugged. So does the senator bringing the charges, he said, and the editor printing the stories. And the judge who signed that. He tapped the warrant. Most important, he added, they've got eyes on this town now. On you. On what you do next. A muscle in the sheriff's jaw twitched. You're saying if I ignore this, I'll be everyone's villain, he said. I'm saying if you ignore it, you'll be in the story instead of just watching it. Caleb replied. The sheriff looked at him a long moment. I liked you better when you were just a drunk at the end of the bar, he said finally. So did I, Caleb said. It was easier. He took a breath. There's more, he added. Harrigan sent copies of statements from other miners. Not just me, men from other camps, other accidents. Sutton's name is all over them. The sheriff exhaled. Where's Mrs. Kane, he asked. Caleb's heart lurched. At the cabin, he said. Last I heard. With the girls. And Miguel. Sheriff's gaze flicked to the window, where the ridge loomed faint in the distance. You sure, he pressed? You haven't been here. I got a telegram from her in Ouray. Caleb said. Miguel too. They said they were holding, digging, fighting Sutton's men off the road. The sheriff grunted. Then we best move fast, he said. He pushed back from the desk. Get your rifle, he told Caleb. I'll get the deputies. We're going hunting. Up them. They were already too late for the first part. Up on Anvil Creek, the day had broken sharp and bright. Sunlight bounced off new snow, blinding. The air was so clear Nora felt she could see each individual breath as it left her mouth. Annie and Rosie sat at the narrow table, eating porridge sweetened with the last of the molasses. Will Mr. Rowe be back today? Rosie asked, spoon pausing halfway to her lips. I don't know, Nora said. Soon, I hope. Will Mr. Miguel be back today? Annie added. Maybe, Nora said. He's got a lot to carry. She tried to make her voice light. Her stomach was a tight knot. She was not surprised when she heard the first distant crunch of boots on the trail. She had been listening for it for days. Girl, she said quietly, get your boots, your coats, go down to the root cellar and wait. You remember the way Annie's eyes widened. The one under the boards, she whispered. Yes, Nora said. Take blankets. Take water. Don't come out until I call you. No matter what you hear. Rosie's lower lip trembled. Is it Sutton, she asked. Probably his friends. Nora said, either way, I don't want them seeing you. Mama, I will come back to you. Nora said, gripping Annie's shoulders, then Rosie's. Do you hear me? I will. But I can't do that if I'm thinking about where you are every second. Annie swallowed. We'll go, she said. Her voice shook, but she kept it level. She took Rosie's hand. They lifted the hatch in the corner, the one Thomas had built to store food against the long winters. Nora had widened it on their second week, at Caleb's suggestion. Hidey hole, he'd called it. Just in case. Just in case had arrived. Annie and Rosie climbed down, the dimness swallowing them. Nora lowered the hatch, then pulled the rug over it. She stood alone in the cabin. The boots grew louder. She took the rifle from its hooks, checked the chamber, breathed once, twice. Outside, shadows moved among the trees. The first knock was not polite. It rattled the door on its hinges. Mrs. Kane, a voice called. Open up. She didn't. The second knock was a kick. The door shook. She braced herself, rifle against her shoulder, muzzle trained at chest height on the inside of the door. On the third hit, the latch splintered. The door flew inward. The man in the lead had a pistol in his hand and a smirk already forming. It died when he saw the barrel aimed straight at him. Stop, Nora said. There were 8 of them. Company coats, hard faces, Men who had walked enough mountain trails to know the weight of their own footsteps. The man at the front lifted his hand slightly. Easy, Mrs. Kane, he said. No need to make this unpleasant. It's already unpleasant, she said. You broke my door. He smiled thinly. Mr. Sutton sends his regards, he said, and an ultimatum. Come quiet and sign what he needs, and this all stays civil. Stay stubborn, and the mountain might have another accident to think about. You set foot in my house, she said, and it's already uncivil. His gaze flicked around the cabin, taking in the single bunk, the table, the stove. No little ones, he observed. Shame. They'd be leverage. She tightened her grip on the rifle. Where are they? Mrs. Caney, he asked, hiding with the China woman again. She didn't answer. He sighed. Suit yourself, he said. Boys, two of the men stepped toward the door, as if they meant to flank it. Nora fired. The recoil jolted up her arm. The man at the front staggered back, cursing, hand flying to his shoulder where blood blossomed. God damn, he snarled. Get her, the cabin erupted. The second man lunged through the doorway. Nora swung the rifle, jamming the stock into his chest. He stumbled. She fired again, the shot going wide but close enough that splinters flew from the doorframe beside his head. Hands grabbed the barrel. She twisted, stamping on toes, driving her elbow into a jaw. For a moment, she held them at the threshold. For a moment, she was taller than fear. Then someone outside shouted. Smoke, another voice, back, back. The men fell away from the doorway, coughing. Nora blinked through the sting in her eyes, heart hammering. Miguel's voice cut through the chaos, sharp as a strike. Miss Kane down. She dropped. An instant later, the back window shattered. A dull explosion thumped through the air, like the mountain clearing its throat. Snow and splinters rained from the roof. The ground shuddered. Outside, men yelled. One screamed. Nora crawled to the doorway and risked a glance. At the edge of the clearing, where the trail narrowed between two outcroppings, a plume of dust and snow was still settling. A chunk of rock the size of a wagon had shifted, blocking most of the path. Two of Sutton's men lay sprawled near it, ears ringing, faces gray. Another clutched a bleeding arm where flying stone had cut deep. Miguel stood behind a fallen tree, rifle up, eyes hard. In his free hand, he held a bundle of coiled fuse in small canvas sacks that it could only be more charges. He had been waiting. Next one goes closer, he shouted. You keep climbing, I start aiming lower. Nora realized, with a lurch, what he'd almost done. He could have set those charges under the cabin itself, brought down the whole slope company men, cabin, herself, everyone under one avalanche of his own making. He'd chosen the trail instead. Twist number 6, she thought, absurdly, as if she were watching someone else's story. The man who'd wanted to bury everyone had decided to only bury escape routes. Sutton's men scrambled for cover, caught between the rifle in Nora's hands and the explosives in Miguel's. Fall back, one shouted. We can go around, another yelled. Miguel fired, the crack sharp. Try, he called. See how many pieces you arrive in. They hesitated. One of them grabbed the wounded leader by his good arm, hauling him back. This isn't over, the man shouted, face twisted with pain. You think Denver'll save you? We own the rails. We own the roads. We own the goddamn mountains. No, Nora said softly, more to herself than him. You just rent them. And rent's due. Miguel set another small charge near the path, fuse dangling. Next step you take this way, he called. You'll learn how loud stone can talk. The men conferred in low, angry voices. The one with the bleeding shoulder glared at the cabin. Fine, he spat. Rot up here. They retreated slowly, hauling their wounded, slipping between trees, disappearing downslope. Nora's arms shook. Her ears rang. She sagged against the doorframe, breath coming in harsh gasps. Miguel emerged from behind the fallen tree, moving carefully, circling to approach the cabin from the side. "You alive?" he called. She laughed once, the sound more like a cough. "For now," she said. He stepped inside, eyes sweeping the room, checking corners, checking her. "You all right?" he asked. She looked down at herself, a few cuts from flying wood, bruises already blooming on her forearms. "I'll be sore," she said. "Not dead." "Good," he said. "I'd hate to waste a perfectly good explosion on the wrong people." He leaned the rifle against the wall and took the explosives from his pocket, setting them on the table with an exaggerated care. "Thought about using these on you once," he said conversationally. "You and Ro both. Blow the whole damn place. Call it justice." Nora met his gaze. "And she asked." He shrugged. "Then I heard some fool in Denver was signing papers with his own name." He said, "And I saw you walk off that platform with your girls. Made me think maybe I wanted something other than a pile of bones to stand on." Her throat tightened. "Thank you," she said. He waved it away. "Thank me when it's over," he said. "If we're still breathing." He glanced at the floor. "Where are the girls?" he asked. Nora lifted the rug and pulled up the hatch. "Here," she said. Two small faces peered up, eyes wide and wet. "Is it done?" Annie whispered. "For now," Nora said. Rosie scrambled up first, voice shaking. I heard the mountain," she said. "Like thunder." "That was Mr. Miguel," Annie said, sending him a solemn look. He made it shout. Miguel's mouth twitched. "I asked it nicely," he said. It agreed. Nora pulled them both into her arms. For a long moment, the four of them stood there, the cabin walls around them, the smell of smoke and disturbed dust in the air, hearts pounding. Then a distant sound threaded through the silence. Hoofbeats. More than two. Less than a dozen. Nora stiffened. "Round two?" she asked. Miguel grabbed his rifle. "Get back down there," he told the girls. Before they could move, a familiar voice cut through the trees. Nora, Miguel, Caleb. He rode into view first, hat low, rifle across his saddle. Behind him, the sheriff and two deputies, badges catching the light. Miguel exhaled. "About time," he muttered. Nora stepped out onto the small porch, relief and anger tangling in her chest. "You took your time," she called. Caleb swung down from his horse, landing heavily. "I came as fast as I could," he said. He looked around at the shattered window, the splintered door, the fresh rubble on the trail. "Looks like you didn't wait for me." "News travels faster than a tired horse," she said. "Sutton's already sent his greetings." The sheriff dismounted with a grunt, hand on his holster. "He sent more than greetings." Miguel said, "Abdihawad." He jerked his chin toward the block path. "Tried to send a funeral." The sheriff squinted at the rockfall. "You do that?" he asked. Miguel shrugged. "Mountain did," he said. "I just asked." The sheriff's mouth twitched. "Well, Mr. Santos, if you're done landscaping, we've got another job," he said. He pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Asher Sutton," he read, "is hereby ordered to stand before the court of the state to answer charges of fraud, criminal negligence, and conspiracy to obstruct justice, among others." Nora blinked. "He's under arrest?" she asked. "Will be," the sheriff said. "As soon as we lay eyes on him." He tucked the warrant back into his pocket. "You coming?" he asked her. She hesitated, glancing at the girls. Caleb followed her gaze. "I'll stay," he said. "With them." Nora's brows rose. "You just got back," she said. "I'm not the one he needs to see first," Caleb replied. "You are." Miguel chuckled. "He's right," he said. "I'm coming too. Someone has to make sure you don't shoot him before the judge gets a turn." "I make no promises," Nora said. They found Sutton at his office. He'd always liked that building sturdy. 2 stories, with large front windows and neat curtains. It looked like respectability. When the sheriff and his small posse rode up, he was on the porch, as if expecting callers. He had a polished walking stick in one hand, a gloved thumb hooked over the top of it. His hat was at just the right angle. He watched them dismount with a calm that made Nora's jaw clench. "Sheriff," he said, "Mrs. Kane, Mr. Santos, to what do I owe this visit to this?" the sheriff said. He held up the warrant. Sutton's eyes flicked to the seal, lingered, then returned to the sheriff's face. "Ah," he said, "the Capitol remembers we exist." "More than that," the sheriff said, "they remember what you did, or are suspected of doing. You're coming with us to answer questions." Sutton's gaze moved to Nora. "And you brought your mascot," he said. "Very dramatic. Mrs. Kane, you've done well, stirring up men who like the sound of their own conscience." Nora stepped onto the bottom stair. "I didn't have to stir much," she said. "You did most of the work yourself. All I did was put it in sentences." His jaw tightened. "You think this ends with me in chains and you on some high ground?" he asked. "You're naive. This is a storm. It will pass. Men like me are rain. Mrs. Kane, we keep coming. I think it ends with the truth on paper," she said. "For once, let the storm do what it wants with you." Miguel leaned against the post, arms crossed. "Also, you kidnapped children," he said. "That doesn't look good in any language." Sutton's eyes flashed. "They were in danger," he said. "Their mother was dragging them into a war they didn't choose." "You set the battlefield under their feet," Nora said. "Don't you dare pretend you were saving them." He looked at the sheriff. "You really going to march me through town like a criminal?" he asked. "In front of the men whose wages I pay, in front of the merchants whose ledgers are full of my name." The sheriff's mouth thinned. "Looks that way," he said. "You won't have a job when this is done," Sutton warned. "None of you will. Consolidated will remember. Consolidated won't exist by the time this is done," Caleb said quietly, stepping up beside Nora. "Not the way it does now. That's the whole point." Sutton turned his head. "Row," he said. "I should have buried you when I had the chance." "You tried," Caleb said. "The mountain spat me back." "You really think they'll pat you on the head for this?" Sutton sneered. "You signed those papers. You took that money. You gave us the fig leaf we needed. You're not clean, Row. You're just convenient." Caleb nodded once. "Yeah, I know," he said, "and I told them that. Under oath. The difference between us is I walked into that room. You have to be dragged." Sutton's cheek twitched. For a moment, something like genuine fear crossed his face, a crack in the polished surface. Then it was gone. He straightened his coat. "I'll go," he said. "I'm not a fool. I know what resisting arrest looks like in headlines, but don't mistake compliance for defeat." He held out his hands, as if conceding to be cuffed. The sheriff obliged, metal clicking around Sutton's wrists. The sound echoed down the street. People had gathered at the edges of the scene. Men from the mines, women from the boarding houses, a few children peeking from behind skirts. Mrs. Chen was there too, arms folded, bruise faded to yellow. Annie and Rosie stood beside him, hands clasped. As Sutton was led down the stairs, his gaze snagged on them. Something bitter, ugly, and almost human flickered in his eyes. Nora shifted slightly, as if she could shield them with her shadow alone. The crowd parted as they walked. No one cheered, no one jeered. They just watched. Eyes that had been looking up at the company office for years now watched its master walk away from it with his hands bound. Nora exhaled slowly. Miguel murmured, "He'll have lawyers. Friends. Some of this will stick. Some won't. I know," she said. "You still satisfied?" he asked. She thought of Thomas, of 12 men whose bodies were still under rock, of the girls pressed against her side. "I'm something," she said. "Satisfied isn't the word. But it's a start. Caleb stepped closer, hat in his hands. It won't bring them back, he said. No, she said, but it might stop the next 12. Terra. Years later, when people told the story, they made it neater than it had been. They skipped the long meetings in stuffy offices, the slow grind of courts that moved like glaciers. They didn't dwell on the nights Nora lay awake wondering if some clerk would lose a crucial paper or if a judge would be bought at the last moment. They mostly said Sutton went to trial. Consolidated's name got dragged through the mud. Fines paid, assets seized. Some men walked away with slaps on the wrist. Others didn't walk away at all. They said Sheriff kept his badge. Barely. They said Rowe testified, then stayed. Strange choice for a man who could have left. They said Kane and Rowe built something on that mountain that didn't chew men up the same way. The truth sat somewhere between the simple versions and the tangled days that actually happened. Nora stayed on Anvil Creek. So did the guilt. So did the vein. They rebuilt the cabin, larger this time, with a second room and an eave that didn't groan at every snow. They shored up the mine with timbers that were thicker than the company accountants would have approved of. They refused to send men into drifts that felt wrong, no matter how rich the ore. They paid their crew more than Consolidated ever had. Miguel became foreman. He walked the tunnels with a lantern in one hand and a palm on the rock, listening. When he said a section was tired, it rested, even if it glinted like a promise. Mrs. Chen moved part of her operation up the mountain, opening a small boarding house near the claim for women and families who worked the mine. She swore more than she prayed, but sometimes Nora caught her lighting incense in the early mornings, eyes closed, lips moving in a language Nora didn't know. Annie grew into her father's pen and her mother's spine. She kept the books for the Cane Row mine by the time she was 17, fingers dancing over columns of figures. When merchants in town tried to cheat her, she gave them a look sharp enough to slice paper. You taught her math, Caleb once said to Nora, watching Annie balance ledgers by lamplight. You taught her what numbers can hide. Nora replied, she's not about to let them. Rosie never entirely escaped the mountain's mark on her lungs. She had quiet days. She had bad days. She also had a laugh that echoed off the slopes and came back twice as loud. She became the first school teacher in the little cluster of houses that grew up near the mine. At first, she taught in the boarding house kitchen, children perched on benches between mealtimes. Later, when Cane Row had enough years behind it and enough money put aside, they built a proper schoolhouse, a simple, square building with big windows and a blue door. Rosie painted the alphabet above the chalkboard by hand, each letter careful. Sometimes, when she dismissed her small class, dust motes spinning in the afternoon light, she would step outside and look up at the ridge. The mine at it was just visible from there, a dark mouth. She would touch her chest, feel the faint tightness that never went away, and think, I lived here. Of all places, Nora and Caleb did not marry quickly. For a long time, they were just there. Two people who shared work and worry and a table, dancing around a grief that was bigger than either of them. Nora kept Thomas's ring on her finger for years. Whenever she took it off to knead bread or wash dishes, she felt strangely naked, as if a part of her history might slip away with the soap. Caleb never asked her to remove it. He carried his own ghosts in quieter ways. Sometimes she would wake in the middle of the night and find him sitting at the table, staring at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. You did what you could, she would say. It wasn't enough, he would reply. Then do more now, she'd tell him. Here. With us. He did. He went back to Denver twice more to testify, each time returning more frayed and more sure. He refused offers to work for other mines that wanted his name for their own records. I'm exactly where I need to be, he'd say, looking up at the ridge. When they finally did stand in front of a preacher years after the trial, after the mine had weathered its first big dip and rebound, it was without fanfare. The ceremony took place on the flat patch outside the cabin. Miguel stood as witness, scowling to hide a smile. Mrs. Chen dabbed at her eyes with a corner of her apron, muttering in irritation at herself. Annie and Rosie flanked Nora, each taking one of her hands. You sure, Rosie whispered. You don't have to. Just because I don't have to do anything. Nora murmured back. That's the point. I want to? Caleb's hands shook as he took hers. Do you? Caleb Rowe, the preacher said. Take this woman, I already did. Caleb blurted, then flushed. I mean, yes, I do. Nora laughed, the sound surprising her with its lightness. I do too, she said. Afterward, but then, when the sun had dipped low and the air turned sharp, Nora stepped away from the small cluster of people and walked to the edge of the ridge. Below, the valley lay quiet. Smoke rose from the few chimneys they'd built. Beyond, Silverton's lights twinkled. Somewhere far off, rails carried trains that now ran without consolidated shadow as heavy over them. Other companies had taken its place, some kinder, some not. Men still got hurt underground. Nothing she'd done had changed the nature of stone or greed. But here, bush on this narrow strip of mountain, something was different. She closed her eyes. For a moment, she let herself imagine Thomas standing beside her, arms folded, gaze fixed on the mine. You were right, she whispered. About the ore, about the vein, about the way this place could change our lives. Wind tugged at her hair. She smiled. And I was right, she added. About keeping the girls. About not letting you bury me in your pride. Footsteps crunched behind her. Caleb's hand brushed her elbow. You talking to him, he asked. Sometimes, she said. Does he answer, Caleb asked. Sometimes, she said again. He stood with her a while in silence. Do you ever wish we'd left, he asked quietly. Sold out when Sutton first came knocking. Gone back east. Found some small life somewhere with curtains that aren't always drawn. She thought of Boston, of cramped rooms and long winters and neighbors who whispered behind gloved hands. Then she looked down at the cluster of buildings that had grown from stubbornness and ore and decisions that had nearly broken her. No, she said, not anymore. He nodded, shoulders relaxing just a fraction. You, she asked. I used to think the only way to be free of this was to walk until the land ran out, he said. Now, he trailed off. Now, she prompted. Now I think maybe the only way to be free of it is to stay, he said. And do it right. She slipped her hand into his. The mountain loomed over them, indifferent and immense. But it remembered. It remembered the men who died inside it, and the ones who walked out. It remembered the day dynamite shook its flanks, not for profit alone, but to hold a line. It remembered a woman in a black dress hauling two small girls up a trail because no one else would make room for them. It would outlast all of them. But for a little while, on a particular ridge, in a particular claim, the story was theirs. And in the quiet just before the sun slid behind the peaks, if you listened very closely, you could almost hear the rock itself murmuring approval.